can see the sign, can't be wrong, no. I don't want you to be afraid. Let me see you cry.
Test, test. If you can find your seats, we're going to kick off. We're a couple minutes behind, but we can get going. So if you can please take your seats. Okay, let's get today going. Day 2 of our MFGA Regenerative Ag Conference. Building off some of the momentum of yesterday, continuing to mingle, mix, and meet friends. We'll start off with the land acknowledgement. So the Victoria Inn and Conference Center is located in Brandon, Manitoba on Treaty 2 territory. This is traditional shared land between the Dakota and the Ojibwe. The Turtle Mountains in Brandon area are also home to the Métis people. As we host our conference here in Brandon, we at Manitoba Forage and Grassland Association acknowledge and respect the history, land, and people of this area and the traditional homelands of the Dene, Anishinaabe, Cree, Dene, and Métis people. Good morning. My name is Duncan Morrison. I'm Executive Director of Manitoba Forage and Grasslands. It's great to have you all back, and it's great to have the new people that have come in to join us today. We're going to start off where sometimes you get little tidbits of relevance and tidbits of how important you might be in the bigger picture. And today we're very, very fortunate to have some elected officials here to introduce and say a few words to you. You are the reason they're here. You are the producers of Manitoba and regenerative ag people, and we're really quite excited to have these people. So we're going to kick off with the federal government with a Zoom greeting from MP Terry Duguid. He's Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and Special Advisor to Waters. So we'll kick off with Terry on Zoom. Gotta love technology. So don't get me going.
Resilient Agricultural Landscapes program that supports carbon sequestration, adaptation, and other environmental co-benefits. We are working with provinces and territories to ensure environmental considerations are at the core.
Committee on Environment, Sustainable Development, and a local guy, and it's great to have Dan here. Dan.
Morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? So yeah, I'm Dan Mazur, Member of Parliament for Dauphin Swan River Neepwa. I just live out actually by the Forest Justice area. If you haven't heard of me before, was previously president of Keystone Agriculture Producers and have a long history with this organization in Duncan as far as working on water management and landscape management in general. So I'm going to take you down a little path here of what we're going to talk about. What I've learned, I first became a member of parliament in 2019. I'm currently the Shadow Minister for Rural Economic Development and Connectivity. And I am, as Duncan said, the Vice Chair of the Environment Committee, which we're doing some exciting stuff on there. So I'm just going to give you kind of an update and how this all relates into your perfect timing of having this conference today. So I think I've always been of the thought that, you know, as farmers, as being an advocate for farming, and the rural areas, we always have to be ready to tell our story. We always have to have ready to, because if we don't tell our story, someone else will. I've learned that very quickly. I've learned at CAP, and I see it in spades when I go back to Ottawa. We're just one small voice in members of amongst 338 other members that have other issues and front and center in very populated areas. It's not to say we need to give up, but we have to have our story and we have to keep on presenting it. Like there is an old saying, if you're not at the table, you're usually on the menu, right? So you've got to keep that always in mind. So in my very first tenure, I had on the connectivity side, I think that's the one thing when I entered being a parliamentarian, I did really want to focus on that because rural Canada is basically being forgotten about. We not only have the most expensive cell phone bills and internet bills in the world, we also have very poor quality. and that needed to be addressed. So I did end up presenting a private members bill that to make internet service providers more accountable for what they're selling you. Right now, internet service providers can sell you a service that are up to speed. So it's like going to the gas station, looking for 50 liters, wanting 50 liters of gasoline, getting 10 liters and yet paying for 50 liters. It's the same thing how they sell you internet service in Canada. My private members bill, which is would stop that practice, and they would make it more accountable. So that it passed the House unanimously, and now it's sitting in the Senate, and it's tied up with a bunch of other private members bill due to this gas tax for farmers right now. So that's where that's at. So why am I talking about connectivity? Aquanti, back many, many years ago, I was with the Assiniboine River Basin Initiative and all that history that goes back to, I think, 2011, somewhere in there after the first flood. We realized as a group that we needed data. There was no cohesiveness of what was going on, and there's still not, strikingly enough. I know MP Duguid talked about, developing this water agency and how we could all work together, and he even took a shot at Harper as far as canceling the PFRA. The whole reason behind canceling the PFRA was so the landscape, the people on the landscape could start working with government. That was a problem. This government, again, is getting a little bit too bloated, and so they want to develop another water agency, and it's very, very interesting. I am very interested to see what you folks have heard about this water agency. Supposedly it is being developed. They're going to create a whole new level of bureaucracy. It's going to be in Winnipeg. They got the offices set up, and we haven't heard anything. We just started a water study, which I think you folks have been asked to be witnesses for, but there is nothing on the landscape of what this actually agency is going to do. They just use the word PFRA because that's how we all remember it. But we need to get our water conversation in a modern day type of conversation and structure. So we need data. Right now, when I'm looking at all the government programs and all the stuff that's going on, it's years out of date. It's a real shame. We're losing a big opportunity, and you guys know all this. Terry listed off a litany of things that we do every day as farmers here. And there's no doubt about it. We know best. Ottawa doesn't know best. And I keep on telling them that, and we'll keep on telling them that. But we have to have our data, and we have to have our story together. So good on you for having this, sticking with this. I know Manitoba Forage and Grassland Association has had a long history of struggle, but I think your time has come, and I really do appreciate that. As far as what's going on in the committee as well, I think it is a time to start having this water conversation. How do we, as an organization, yes, work with governments, get ready for it, but don't set yourself up for failure. Don't set yourself up for, here, the government's going to come and save our day. What can you do as locals? What kind of programs do you need so you can get the industry to start feeding your programs? What your RMs, what can they do as far as implementing programs so you maintain control? Because if you maintain control of your landscape, it's all better. It's better for the community, and it's better for Canada. And I do honestly believe in it. And it's organizations like this, like CAP, like all those grassroots organizations are making a difference, but they are needed. So democracy is not a spectator sport by a long shot. And I guess in closing, I would also, Minister Kostitian is going to come up here next, and we got a new government in place. I think it is really a long overdue conversation of what this carbon tax is doing to our rural communities. It is a sinister tax, especially when it comes to rural Canada. A lot of people say that you'll hear the soundbite, oh, you're getting more back than you're paying out. That is factually incorrect. And how they get away with telling that story, I don't know. I guess a lot of people don't realize what they're actually paying for carbon tax. You are paying carbon tax on your schools, on your hospitals, on your municipal buildings. Like, what the hell? like, and stop and just think about that. And it's hundreds of millions of dollars to Manitoba here. And that's taking it out of our rural communities. We don't see it back. Things like that need to stop. So, and I please keep on addressing it, keep on the fight, and looking forward to some conversations.
Thank you, Dan. That was really quite a good summary of a lot of things going on, and really appreciate you being here. Next up is, as Dan alluded to, Agriculture Minister Ron Kostitian. Ron is from the Dauphin riding, and many of you are familiar with Ron, and I really don't think he needs me to tell you who he is. I think you're well aware of who Ron Kostitian is. So, Minister, please.
Thank you so much, Duncan, and it is truly my pleasure to be here today. There's a lot of familiar faces. My memory's still good. When I was Agriculture Minister 7 years ago, when I left the department, unintentionally, but I did. But it's glad to be back. I'll give you a little bit of history on myself. I was a mixed grain farm and beef producer for a number of years in the municipality of Mossy River, which is Winnipegosa's Dauphin, north of Dauphin, Manitoba. So 40 years of, I've said this before, me chasing cows and cows chasing me, maybe had led to a couple of hip replacements that I had to do with in the last number of years, but it is what it is. Age maybe has part of it to do. But I just want to say to all the attendees, to the agriculture sector, I witnessed it. I've gone through hard times and good times in the agriculture industry. Climate change, weather events, we can do everything right, whether we're putting the right amount of fertilizer, we're doing the right amount of expertise stuff on the lay of the land. But at the end of the day, it's Mother Nature that decides whether we're successful at it or not. And the reality is that we need to accept the fact that the weather events have changed considerably, and industry is doing their due diligence of accommodating, the different varieties of seed that we grow and maybe enhancing them so we prepare ourselves for the weather events that we're going to be facing in the future. But I do have to say it's not for the goodness of the sincerity of agriculture producers such as you in the audience here, is that thank you for what you do, the risks that you take in your occupation or sub-occupation, because at the end of the day, we're finally being rewarded in the beef industry. I recall very faintly when I was selling calves and I got $1 and some odd a pound for a 600-pound steer. I even celebrated that night after I picked up the check at the auction, right? Obviously, the prices have improved, but so has input costs continued to rise for all agriculture sectors. And I'm just hoping in the beef industry, as opportunity knocks, we've seen a decline in the agriculture, the beef sector. You'd almost think this is the opportune time where the upcoming producers choose to stay in the occupation, are thinking different. Maybe it's time to cash in the lottery ticket, but I'm just hoping that there's some reconsideration. We need to build the beef numbers along with agriculture and the importance of agriculture in the province of Manitoba. I've said this numerous times. We grow a lot of raw product, but what we're missing in the business component is the added value that comes with the raw product we grow in this province. We need to saddle some opportunity to add to the gross domestic products that we grow in this province. We need to enhance that opportunity to start making more of a finished product of the raw products we grow in this province. And we need to do that in partnership with the federal government as well. But it is truly a pleasure to be back, and I will assure you that I have not forgotten my past. as being sitting in a tractor, working those long hours, the cabbing hours, the challenges we all face as agriculture producers. I'm with you, and I want to attest to you that I will do the best I can as I'm your agriculture minister for the province of Manitoba. But also, here's an opportunity that we talk about how agriculture is changing. And the room of interest in regenerative of agriculture is a top priority. Simply put, what we used to do 15, 20 years is somewhat changing. And it's not a bad thing. It's what we need to do is sit back and learn from other provinces, other parts of the world, what they're doing different in the industry that we can gain. And I often say this, communication is probably one of the best medication that we can have, because we can learn from other jurisdictions, learn from other individuals, other companies, what they're doing different to make it opportunity. We also realized that a new mandate letter that to the Department of Agriculture, I would like to acknowledge that Manitoba Forage and Grass Association is being a lead in the edge of organizations working to further define and generative agriculture in the Manitoba province. You know, when I go back on the history of how it has changed, the forage, rotational grazing, as I was mentioning to Duncan just in the lobby, is that when we came out with the rotational grazing pasture opportunities that we probably came into fruition 20 some odd years ago. And we found it to be very successful in our beef operation, but a case in point on that particular subject, where you've got 7 or 8 different paddocks that you would use traditionally for grazing purposes and be efficiency in the forage establishment. But we also landed up using it during, prior to the calving season start. We would process hay bales in the 7 paddocks, and what we would do is open up the gates accordingly for the winter use. So theoretically, it was another opportunity of the rotational pasture system that was established for summer, spring and summer, but we also use it in the wintertime when we were able to have a watering system in a central. And it was after 7 or 8 years of processing feed and maintaining the manure stay out in the pasture rather than the corrals, was an opportunity that we witnessed the importance of the grass regrowth on those 7 paddocks, providing Mother Nature cooperates with the rainfall. So those are one example of what our grandfathers used to do and what we do today. We learn by that, and that's why we work with organizations such as your organization, Duncan, that we realize the benefit and added value at no additional cost, other than being very creative and thinking outside the box that we traditionally have been. But it's truly a pleasure to be here today, and I can't emphasize the importance of working with a number of other organizations, and I know the watershed organizations are very key. And just in a slight conversation I had in the lobby with some other individuals, is the reality of watershed planning opportunity where climate change will affect opportunity of water, and we rely on water an awful lot. And we have to be creative of accepting the fact that, are we going to have an opportunity to have sufficient amount of water systems in our watershed? And we need to start planning ahead of retention dams, opportunities of having an outside source. Irrigation is becoming a very top priority, but it all is going to stand on the volume of water that we have to be somewhat creating a watershed that can accommodate that for future years. I know that our department, the Resilience of Agricultural Landscape Programs, invests in sustainable improvements of perennial landscapes, including improved grazing management, planning, and incorporation of establishment of trees within the farm, and the field management of Manitoba agricultural landscape. In addition, in our Department of Sustainable Agriculture Manitoba programs, invest into our farms to improve cropland management practices and align with regenerative agriculture definition. For example, low disturbance of field practices, reduce pesticide use, prevent soil compaction, and perennial coverage for sensitive lands. We all know the importance of leased land, crown lands, and the importance of what our marshland does of regeneration. And that's why our government is still very key on moving forward of revisiting the crown lands opportunities that I think it has the merit for future generations, and to revisit our crown land is taking place, and we will continue to work with crown land leasee holders and the opportunity for the betterment for water regeneration in our province of Manitoba. So in closing, it is truly my pleasure to be here today, Duncan. I look forward to a long-term collaboration with all producers in the province of Manitoba. And thank you for the invitation. And thank you to all who are involved in the agriculture sector and whatever else you do. Thank you, and let Mother Nature cooperate with all of us for the betterment of us in the agriculture industry in the province of Manitoba. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Minister Kostitian, for your words, and motivating words indeed. Just in a recap of what we just heard from all three dignitaries that just spoke was water. They all three spoke about water. So I think we're all on the right path here, and I think prioritizing water is timely, and I think we have the attention of people that can help us. So keep the good fight on the water. Next up, I'd like to introduce Amber McNish. Amber, as you know from yesterday, those who were here, is our conference co-chair, and we'll be sessioning the next session. We're a little bit behind, but just be patient and we'll work it out. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here. As Duncan mentioned, I'm Amber McNish, and I live in Lyleton, Manitoba, and help farm with my parents on their commercial cow-calf operation. To keep things going along nicely, I'll introduce Paul next. Paul is an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Calgary, where he is a landscape ecologist and conservation biologist working in the prairie croplands and rangelands. He is a PI on the Prairie Precision Sustainability Network, which maps unprofitable farmland across Alberta and Saskatchewan to support its conversion to habitat. He believes that such wins-wins are well within reach in Prairie Canada. And with that, I will let Paul take over. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amber, for the introduction. I've got to say, I am just super excited to be here. I've been listening to this morning and a little bit yesterday, and I'm hearing the kinds of things that I haven't typically heard a lot being said at conferences with farmers and ranchers. I think I'm, Regen Ag crowd. This is the place I want to talk to, and I think I have some interesting things to tell you. So I hope you'll agree at the end of my 45 minutes with you, I'm going to show you some pictures of bees. In fact, I think that's why they asked me to come. They asked me to come and talk a bit about bees and pollinators and landscapes, but it's really the landscape bit that I want to get to, because as the point I'm going to try and make to you is that bees and pollinators are the entry point to doing cool stuff with landscapes, and in turn doing the Regen Ag sustainability thing that we've heard the minister and the two other politicians this morning already discuss. How do we bring sustainable agriculture at scale to Manitoba and to the other prairie provinces? And the message I'm going to get to you is somehow we're going to start at bees, and we're going to end up talking about messy fields and how they mean bigger yields. Just hold with that, it rhymes. Messy fields and how they mean bigger yields. So let's see if I can make this work. Okay, let's start with some bee stories and show you some pictures of bees. Here we go. So when you think bee, how many, hands up, how many people think a bee is black and yellow? Oh, good, there's a lot, quite a few educated people in here, that's great. So bees aren't just, of course, your black and yellow variety. This is the mugshot. These are the honey bees, the ones, of course, that are kept and they're introduced to North America. They have, they're put out beside fields to make honey. Sometimes they, in the prairies, they're also associated with pollination, but mostly it's about making honey with these guys. There's a lot more to bees than these. Let's show you some more. They're not just black and yellow. Bees are many colored, and you are looking at images, pictures of bees that are found in the Canadian prairies. Look, there's a blue one, there's a red one, and there's a green one. Look how beautiful they are. They are many colored. In fact, our work at the University of Calgary from my lab, and I'm going to talk about that mostly today in my work at the University of Calgary, we've shown that there are over 300 species of bees in Alberta, and I'm sure there's even more than that in Manitoba, because let's face it, Manitoba's better, right? So what do bees do? Well, they are in search of pollen and nectar. I think we're probably familiar with that idea, maybe from elementary school. So, they're out there, they're going to collect some pollen. Their pollen is full of rich protein that they use to feed their offspring. They're also out for the sweet, sugary stuff, for the nectar. I've also heard people describe bees as vegetarian wasps. So, they're not, wasps, the ones that are going to ruin your picnic, they're out for the meat, okay? Bees are very closely related to wasps, but they're vegetarians, right? You might like that. I don't know. So, next slide here. So, moving pollen around by accident. That's really how plants have. Okay. There's nobody underage in here, right? So, this is how plants have sex. They move, the bees and other pollinators help move the pollen around from plant to plant, and those pollen grains are like, let's just say that's how they reproduce. So, and that's helped out by these finely branched hairs on their legs. Okay, but not everything is a bee. So, a lot of the time people say, oh, that, I've already talked about wasps, the ones that are after your meat. Well, wasps are they sometimes look like we think a bee does, that black and yellow, but there's other things that also mimic bees, that kind of pretend they look like bees. And this one here on the right, this one here on the right is a syrphid fly. It's actually a fly. It's not at all related to wasps or bees. You can tell it's got really big eyes. That's what makes it, one of the things that makes it stand out as a fly. And it is pollinating, but it's not a very good pollinator because it's not hairy. It doesn't have the stuff to pick up the pollen on it. And then here, this is actually another type of fly. It's called a bee fly, and it kind of mimics a bumblebee. It kind of has that bumblebee kind of shape, but it's actually a vicious parasite, you would have thought. It also visits flowers waiting to pounce. And here's some other animals waiting to pounce on a poor bumblebee. Look at that crab spider. It's been lying in wait inside that flower, waiting to attack that bumblebee. And here is a beetle. Beetles are also flower visitors, but it's not hairy either. It's just there to eat the pollen. It's kind of stealing it. And, I know when you think of bees, you think of, well, they have a hive, okay? Well, yeah. Those yellow and black honeybees, the ones that the beekeepers put beside the fields, sure, they have a colony and there's a queen in there and there's workers and there's drones. Well, most of those 300 wild native bee species we have in prairie Canada are solitary. They don't have hives. They don't have colonies. There isn't a queen. But there are some important exceptions. Bumblebees. Bumblebees are beautiful, furry things. You can pet them, you want to take them home. Who needs a cat? Okay? And this bumblebee, this is Bombus perplexus. That's the scientific name for a bumblebee. And there she's waiting. The queen is waiting at her nest, waiting for the workers to come back with some nectar. Solitary bees. As I mentioned, most of our bee species are solitary. That means they just have a nest in the ground. It's really just a nest where they lay eggs. I'll show you some pictures in a second. And then they fly away and they come back and they lay some more eggs. And there's not a whole bunch of them doing a lot of stuff in the ground. They're mostly ground nesting solitary bees. And that's an important point because ground nesting, ground landscape, farmers, sustainability. We're going to make those links in a second. Anyway, so here are some, here's a sweat bee, and here is another, what is this one? It's a longhorn bee, and you can see it's got a really long tongue, and that long tongue helps it get deep inside the corollas of delicious flowers and to suck up the sweet sugary nectar. And look at this mining bee bristling with pollen. Look at all the sex that those plants are having. And then this, there's a leafcutter bee, and of course if you've had anything to do with alfalfa seed production, leafcutters are really, really important for ensuring the yield of alfalfa seeds, increasing that yield. And the story about bees and yield, there's a little bit of that story here on the prairies. Of course, we grow a lot of canola, and canola has lovely yellow flowers that can be visited by bees. And there is some evidence to suggest that the canola yield can be a little bit higher when you've got visitation from bees. And just a few last bee pics here. This is a bumblebee, but it's not what you think. It's actually trying to invade a nest and cuckold, which means lay its eggs there and have the other bumblebee raise its offspring. So there's all sorts of nasty things going on in the bee world. They aren't all friendly and furry, although they do look that way. And then most of the bees that we have in the prairies do not nest in cavities like these bees. So you can see here, there are holes in wood, in trees, and they use that as their nest. These are the solitary bees. And here's a sort of a man-made solitary bee nest. And you can see here that the bee has gone and put a whole bunch of pollen balls in there and wrapped them in leaves and laid a single egg in each one of those pollen balls, and then that egg becomes a larvae, and the larvae eats the pollen. It's full of rich protein, and then it flies out of the nest. And that's what most solitary bees do. And final bee shots. These are two species of prairie bees emerging from their ground nests. Beautiful abdomen of this digger bee just digging away and heading into her nest to put pollen in a ball and lay an egg. And ground nesting bees. We're going to come back to that notion a little bit later. Now, I'm just going to change gears. We talked about bees. We're still going to talk a little bit about bees for a bit, but I'm going to take you now into another area of research that my lab is involved in at the University of Calgary. And I guess we started out the same way this talk started out. We started out looking at bees, because bees are cool, and they're important for biodiversity. But we kind of made the connection that bees, if you like, are a stepping stone, or a gateway, or a catalyst, if you like. It could be used to drive some other stuff happening on farmers' lands. And through the rest of the time you have with me, I'm going to make these connections for you. How we go from this concept that I'm going to introduce called messy fields, we're going to make those links. Let's start. The first point I want to make is messy fields are better for bees. So what do I mean? What does he mean by messy fields? I love this photograph. This is a picture of from central Alberta, and then these are wetlands that are surrounded in trees. And you can see here the farmer has been a little bit annoyed by them, has been driving circles around them. They were in my way. And of course, that's an absolutely legitimate perspective. You know, you've got large machinery, you've got to drive it straight, you've got gas costs to deal with, and then in many cases these inconvenient features are in the way and they cause trouble. But I think the point I'm going to try and make is that messy fields like this, fields that have vegetation in them that is not annual crop, okay, are an opportunity for sustainability, an opportunity for regenerative ag. So another shot, tidy fields versus messy fields. Look at this, look how tidy those fields are. 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters, okay? Not a little bit of veg that isn't an annual crop in sight. It's a landscape 2 sections by 2 sections that is just mostly canola, it looks like. It's kind of in bloom there. Let's move over. This shot is from southern Alberta, where this is a very, very common kind of scene. Let's move over to Manitoba, where messy fields are far more common. So on the right, you've got, because, well, it's a lot wetter in Manitoba than it is in southern Alberta, so there's more opportunity for mess to grow, like you have trees here. I love that. You know, you can see here in this image that there's a lot of other junk happening. You know, you still have the same, same dimensions here in this image, but you've got, you know, there's a set aside here around the creek, and there's also trees and various other things in the way on that landscape, and some of it's crops and some of it's pasture. So there's kind of a much more diverse kind of land. So let's just look at what that mess might mean for bees. Back to bees. What might that mess mean for bees? Okay, so first of all, we've got a wetland here in the foreground, and around that wetland is some perennial grassland that the farmer, who is clearly growing canola in the distance, has decided just to leave in place. Maybe the soil is too wet year over year, so they've left that soil undisturbed, and we now have some perennial grass and other forbs growing there around that wetland. And that is an opportunity for beneficial insects like bees. So one of the things that can happen there is that there are wildflowers. Wildflowers can grow there, and when wildflowers grow there, that's food, nectar and pollen for bees. As I've already shown you, the bees are going in there, they're grabbing that pollen, they're bringing it back to their nest, they're making a pollen ball to feed their eggs when they hatch. So that's food for bees. It's also a ground nesting opportunity because, you know, in years when that ground isn't too wet, it's undisturbed soil, it's a great chance to build that nest for your eggs. And then, of course, in the distance, we have a canola field, which has much more frequent soil disturbance, whether that's the seed drill or in the days before zero-till, it was actually frequent cultivation, or maybe it's just the exposure of that soil for part of the year. In the winter, when there isn't that sort of as much standing vegetation on that field, it makes it much harder for bees to use that for their nest building. So we have a landscape, a cropping landscape, where the permanent parts of it, the non-crop veg, like you're seeing in the foreground, is an opportunity for bees and other beneficials. And then also, finally, I mentioned that there's also food opportunities in the field. So canola in particular is this massive amount of food that covers the entire prairies, you know, some for, 6 or 8 weeks in the summer. And that opportunity is used quite a lot by bees. But the problem with it is it's just a temporary pulse. It goes away. It comes and it goes. So it's a short-lived amount of food. But it's still part of the story. Let's not leave it out. Okay, so my lab has been looking at bees and beneficial insects and landscapes and searching for win-wins across the prairie since about 2015. And I'm showing you some research. This is all research coming out of us, the University of Calgary, from my students and various others. Not done by me, by the way. It's all done by students in my lab. So yeah, I can't take credit for it, but I'm going to tell you about it. So since about 2015, we've visited all those red dots across Alberta. That's Alberta there. That's the province that wants to take away 53% of your pension. What do you think about that? Do you think it's a good idea? Okay. So this is Alberta, and all those red spots are the places where we sampled since 2015. So we had about 335 sites in or near crop fields. You can see that yellowish haze on the map there. That's where all the actual annual crop fields are in Alberta. So we had sampled in and among them all across the province. We did 9,000 trap weeks of sampling. That means we had, traps out for 9,000 weeks in total. We multiply it across all the number of traps. And in that time, we murdered about 200,000 insects and spiders. And we brought them back to the lab, and that's what this looks like here. So that's what our lab process looks like, drawers and drawers of pin bees, and here's the furry bumble and the green sweat bee and the blue osmia and the orange bee there. And this is what our process looks like in the lab. And we got about 307 species of solitary bee, 25 species of furry, beautiful bumblebees, 1 species of honeybee, because there only is 1 species. And we also got other things like harvestman, daddy longlegs, 41 species of ground beetle, and spiders, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. So here's a concept. Let's do a little bit of science now. I'm going to ask you to join me on a scientific journey here. We're going to look at some graphs, but it's not too complicated. I want to try and share this with you so you can understand how we go about getting our data and how to and why it might actually show something. Okay? So join me on this journey. So we're going to talk about a concept called the spillover effect. And that idea is, messy places like that green thing on that cultivated field you see up there is like a fountain, like a pot that's boiling. And as that water, the soup, gets to the top of the pot, it starts spilling over, right? And it's going to start flowing over into the field. Well, in the case of this messy area, it's not soup. It's bees and other beneficial insects that might bubble up and might use that as their habitat and flow into that field and do all sorts of good stuff. So how, as scientists, do we figure out if that's actually going on? What do we do? Well, here's what we do. We stick out sampling stations in the field at different distances from this messy place. So look, that cross there, that's a sampling station. So let's put out a whole bunch of them in the field. And you can see we're putting them at different distances away from that messy place. We're also building up some data on the right there. And this is what we're thinking. We're thinking that when you're closer, this is distance from a messy place, when you're closer, you're going to have more bees because just like the pot that's spilling over is going to be more closer. And as you go further away, you're going to have fewer. So that's more, less bees, closer, further away. You can see how it drops off. So what as scientists we're looking for is we're looking for that kind of relationship. So the red line, as you go away from a messy place, you're going to have less and less of bees. So let's go out to a whole bunch of fields, just like that one, and we'll set out sampling stations in the field and see if we can find that pattern across a whole bunch of places. But, every good bit of science needs the other. What happens if we don't see this? What could be going on? Well, if there's no spillover effect, we sample in the same places, but the line's kind of flat. Okay? It doesn't matter how far we go away, there's roughly the same number of bees or other insects. This tells us that that messy place doesn't really matter. And this could be the case in your pastures. Okay? Pastures that aren't disturbed, where the soil, well, I'm sure there might be cattle there, but it's not going to have that sort of same intensive degree of disturbance year over year. And it's basically like one whole big messy area where bees can nest in the ground and other beneficials can live. So this allows us to compare this kind of approach. So here's what we did. And you can't really see it on the top right, but I just want to show you that the results I'm showing you were scientific publications. They appeared in scientific journals. This is only just to tell you that it's not just me blowing hot air up here. Other scientists have looked at this and said, well, the hot air isn't too hot. It's okay, right? So it's not. So there's some peer review is what we call it. So what we did is we went to 21 fields and we found messy places in those fields, and we set up like these stations at different distances away in this particular study, and we used these kind of traps, these kind of colorful blue veins and yellow things to capture bees and other insects. And then as we found really exactly what we thought we would find. So this is distance from the messy place, 0, 25 meters away, 75 meters away. This is the number of bees, high, low, okay? So when we were in a canola field or a wheat field, this is what we saw, these lines. We saw this spillover. So high close to the messy place, low farther away. But when we were in a pasture, we saw that flat line. So what does this tell us? The science tells us that messy places are like that fountain. They are habitat. They're providing places for nesting, food for bees, homes and habitats for the animals that are beneficial for biodiversity, but also for farmers. So we were also interested in, what about different types of mess? We're just talking about messy places in a general sense. What do we mean by mess? Well, it turns out in Alberta, there isn't that much mess in southern Alberta to talk about. You've got what we call dry semi-natural area, which is sort of like shrubs and forbs and so forth. We also have perennial grasslands, and then wet semi-natural, so the kinds of plants that would grow around or close to wetlands. Not so much like you have here in Manitoba, but it's still a different kind of group in the plant. So it turns out that we can really have about only 3 other types of mess, if you want to kind of classify it broadly in Alberta. So what we did is we went to a whole bunch of places, in fact 150 of them, where there was only one type of mess within about 1,500 meters of the sampling location. And then we went to a bunch of other places where there were 2 or 3 types of mess near the sampling location. So we did that, and we also published this in another paper. And we found this, another graph for you, but this should be pretty simple. I'll explain it. So if there was one type of mess nearby, you had fewer bees. And if you had 3 types of mess nearby, you had more types of bees. Okay, so this is the number of types of bees or species of bees. So if you want more bee diversity, you need more types of mess around. That's what this study showed. So more types of vegetation, more complexity of that vegetation means more types of bees. Wait, every type of bee has its own opinion on how much it likes the mess. And this ridiculously confusing figure, I'm not going to try and explain it. I'm just going to show you that along the side here, there's the list, the Latin names of about 39 different species. And the ones at the top, they like it when it's not messy. The ones at the bottom, they like it when it is messy. So what's the bottom line here? Well, if you want more species of bee, you can have more types of plant and vegetation in your landscape, but every kind of bee is going to respond to that differently, right? So it's just like, a bee is not a bee is not a bee, just like you wouldn't say, every bird is the same either, right? So each species of bird or each species of bee responds to that landscape in a different way. So take-home messages. I'm going to give you a couple more of these before I'm done today. The idea is, how can we summarize this in a few words that might be useful for you to take home? And this is it. Messy fields support more bee species and get bees closer to crops. And that might matter if your crops are canola or alfalfa, which benefit from some pollination. So my next point, we're moving away from bees now. We're moving into natural enemies. Messy fields are better for natural enemies. What are natural enemies? Natural enemies, well, are things like these beetles that my student Tobin has drawn. They're a great illustrator. You can see here the Pterosticus melanarius. It's a beetle. That's the Latin name of this very, 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 very common big black beetle. It's in fields all across the prairies. It's a hungry and voracious predator. It goes out and will brutally murder all sorts of caterpillars, but it also eats, woohoo, weed seeds as well. It eats everything. It chows down on a lot of things. We might say that something like this beetle is a very beneficial insect to have in our fields. It's doing a lot of work for us. It might even be offsetting some of our herbicide and pesticide costs already, and we don't even know about it. And here's some more pictures of beetles of various types. We counted something like 50 species, but there's way more than that in the prairie fields. And also, let's not forget the spiders and the harvestmen that go out there and also have fangs and eat the bad guys. So the same idea again. Can we do spillover again? Can we use that whole idea of spillover to show that messy places might be spilling over like that boiling pot, these good beneficial animals into the crop to do good work? And so here's a drawing of it. Here's your habitat. Here's your messy place. Here's your field. Are they moving out of that habitat to find food? And here's the part. Well, we use the same method again. This shows you this figure again. Sampling in a whole bunch of places near messy places, and we're looking for this negative, this drop as you go further away. And sure enough, in beetles, we found that. We found that in this voracious, hungry beetle, Pterosticus melanarius. We measured about 20,000 of them. We looked at them, 20,000 of them. In fact, I've had more students now. I think we've counted close to about 60,000 of these beetles. So as you move away from the edge, you can see the blue line here. It's kind of dropping. So less beetles. As you move away, there's fewer. But that's only early in the season. Later in the season, that goes away. We thought about that for a minute. We thought, well, early in the season, that kind of makes sense. They're spending their winters in the messy places. They're moving into the crop. And then later in the season, they're already up there. We found a similar kind of thing going on with spiders, and I won't spend much time talking about that. But, it's one thing just to go out there and count, fun. Let's go out and count the animals that are dead. Let's kill a lot of things and see if the animals are there. Presumably, they're eating something. But I had a couple of students who said, that's not good enough for me. I want to figure out if they're actually doing anything out there. Are they actually predating? Are they using their fangs for good? Let's put it that way. And so what Tobin did was they figured out that these plasticine caterpillars, they put a bunch of these rolls of plasticine in an aquarium, threw a bunch of beetles in, and sure enough, the beetles started biting the caterpillars. They thought, biting the plasticine. They thought the green plasticine were caterpillars. So they headed up to these, and we looked at them closely, and we could see there's very special bite marks that are left in those caterpillars that show, the fangs or the mouth parts went in there. So what Tobin did is put out plasticine caterpillars, I think, thousands of them, across 150 sites across parts of central Alberta, and waited 14 days and to see if there was a relationship between messy places and how much the beetles were biting. And I had another student, Sylvia, and she put out these egg cards. So these are caterpillar eggs on cards, and if you leave them out there for 6 hours, a bunch of the eggs disappear. And we filmed it. It turns out that beetles, like the one I showed you, are actually picking them off. So we can use that as an indicator of how much good stuff is actually happening in the crop. So what we found is that natural enemies attack our caterpillars more when it's nearer to a messy place. And natural enemies eat caterpillar eggs more when it's closer to a messy place. So again, the message again, spill over from a messy place, not just of the animals, but of their bitiness. Okay? We found they were more bitey when they're closer to the edge. So take-home message, here you go. Messy fields get natural enemies closer to crops, and they increase predatory activity on pests. So these are things that, you might care about. Next point. Messy fields, wait a minute. I think we're about to talk about money here. Messy fields support higher crop yields. Wait a minute. We went from these to messy fields to natural enemies and fields. Now we're talking about crop yields. How does he make those links? Well, the link is the messy fields. So let's just stop for a minute. Let's say spillover was happening not just from messy places like the green stuff around this wetland, but also from the edge of the field, like the margins, the grassy margins of the field. Those are kind of like habitats. Let's say spillover was happening from all of those places, and we colored that spillover with red. Because spillover only goes so far. This is where the pot is boiling the most, the red area, and further into the field, the soup doesn't get as far. Right? So if we colored two different fields, this kind of boring quarter, I'm sure the farmer loves to drive on that one, fast. Okay, and then this one, where there are lots of things in their way, but you can see right away that the picture of the field on the right has more red in it, so that means more of the actual crop is closer to where the spillover is happening. Okay? Now I can hear you saying, well, the field on the right has got less crop in it, so I make less money. Yeah, of course, that is absolutely true. But the point I'm trying to make is there's a sweet spot. There's a sweet spot between fields like the ones on the left and the ones on the right, where you can have just enough messy places for cool stuff to happen in the crop. So we talked about spillover here on the left, but here's a new thing I'm going to talk about on the right. It's called what happens if messy places are having an effect on the crop. You might see this thing that my lab decided to call a yield halo. So if you go out into that field and you look near a messy place, you might see that the yield of your canola or your wheat or whatever is just a little bit higher there. Now, when I say you can see it, it's going to be pretty subtle, right? Because if you could see it easily, farmers would have seen it for decades, for centuries. But what we're saying is there could be a small increase in yield in that area, and that would tell us something really important. It would tell us that something's actually happening on these places that farmers probably should care about. So we went out looking for yield halos, and we did that in a number of ways. I'm going to show you just one of the ways we did it. And that was, we asked a whole bunch of producers across Alberta to give us their precision yield data from the combine. And they were very nice. They gave us their precision yield data. And that's what that looks like. So if you folks that have combines, and many of them nowadays, I think about 80% are equipped with precision yield monitors, which are GPS connected. So as that seed flows over a sensor, there's a measure that's connected to an exact point in your field that tells you how much yield you're getting from your canola, from your wheat, from all sorts of crops. So you can make maps like this picture here, and the yellow bits are where the yield is higher, and the blue bits are where the yield is lower. And you can see how there's quite a lot of variability across many fields. Some have less, some have more. So it has sometimes a lot to do with management. It also has a lot to do with where you are in the prairies. So what we did is we did this for 757 canola fields across central Alberta. And to do that, we combined this precision yield data with satellite imagery. So we build special models that connect pictures from space with data on the ground, which means you can spy on your yield. It means we can, from space, figure out roughly, not exactly, but roughly, how much yield every field in Canada produced. Now, does this make us bad people? Well, we're using this for good, okay? And we're not going to share it with your neighbors, and it's not really quite exact enough for us to use that in any way. But it allows us to see patterns. By the way, it's not just us who are doing it. I was talking to some companies a few weeks ago. They're doing this at scale. They're putting satellites out that are intended just to measure and guess your yield from space, and they're going to be doing it way more efficiently than we are. And we might be supplying some of that to the banks as well, because they're building partnerships in these ways. So, you know, the world is definitely changing, and there are people watching their fields from space. So what we're doing is we did it, but we found 757 canola fields, and we connected this precision yield with data from the satellite imagery. And what that allowed us to do was to really ask this question: are yield halos happening? Can we find evidence that messy places like this one in the picture here, the one along the edge of the field, is spilling over? I don't know if you can see that yellow halo very well, but it's creating a kind of a little boost into that crop. Can we find that in the data? So the data, the picture I'm showing you here comes from those 757 fields we spied on. And this along the bottom here is the distance from the messy place, 0 meters, way into the field, 250 meters. And then canola yield. On this one, low to high. And that line there is about the average canola yield of the whole of everything, right? That dotted line. So when you're right near the edge, your yield is low. Farmers have known that forever, right? Your yield's going to be a little bit lower near the edge of the field because, well, the plants are more exposed, there's more weeds, it's drier, whatever. But as you move into the fields and conditions get a little sweeter, that's what we found. We found this above average bump across all of those 757 fields. And then as you move about beyond 100 meters or so, it returns to the average. So our data found the halo. So this is from 757 fields moving away from non-crop, from messy places in those fields. We found this pattern. Now, okay, let's be real. This isn't going to be worth a lot of money to farmers. The yield boost that we found is less than the yield loss you typically find at the edge of the fields, right? So this is not going to make farmers rich. But what it tells us is that messy places are at least paying the farmer back for being there, okay? So to me, that's a strong message, particularly for those who are involved in regen ag. They're saying, you know, I can do this stuff in my crop fields, and I might not lose anything. I might not gain a lot in terms of yield, but I might not lose anything major either. We did one more thing. I briefly want to show you this. We put up cages to keep out the bees. And we did it at different distances from the messy places. These little red dots show you where we did it. And what we found is, around the point of the field, that would be about this particular spot, 25 meters in, where we expected to see evidence of the halo, we found that canola plants under a cage that kept out the bees had lower yields than the plants just outside. So what that tells us, this is an experiment, that tells us that bees have a little bit to do with that yield halo. So here's your take-it-home message. Messy fields can boost crop yields by small amounts. And it depends on the crop, it depends on a lot of things. Like you're not going to get this guaranteed boost, because it's variable across fields. But on average, messy fields can boost crop yields by small amounts, and beneficial insects spilling from messy places are partially responsible. That's what the bee stuff I showed you with the cages shows us. But there's probably other reasons that messy places are boosting yield as well. For one, they're often wetter. They often provide shelter and shade. You know, there's lots of other factors that are at play. But what this tells us is regardless of what the factor is that's causing those yield boosts, it's still there. And these are probably just one of several plays. So how can we make more messy fields? We're at a Regen Ag conference. We're kind of interested in those kind of ideas, aren't we? I hope. So how can we make more mess? And I have a plan. I need your help. And there's actually some flyers on the table that tell you how you can help. How can we make more messy fields? Well, one thing we can do is we can find the parts of the fields that are already losing the farmer money, okay? Seeded acres across existing crop fields that every year the farmer sprays and seeds and spends money on inputs but doesn't get it back in yields. There are, we estimate, there could be somewhere between 4 and 10% of Prairie Canada is currently seeded, but shouldn't be because it's losing money. So what we've got a project going, it's called the Prairie Precision Sustainability Network, and our goal is to make maps of the entire prairies wall to wall, and we've been doing this for 2 years now, to figure out to estimate where those low profit places are that are seeded, where the farmer is losing money just by farming them. And if we can find where those are, we can then go and approach that farmer and say, hey, maybe you'd like to do what we call precision restoration. Maybe you'd like to square off part of that field. It's not really a square there, but square off part of it, maybe 5, 10, 15 acres that are losing you money year over year. That's what the red bits are. These only make you money in canola when the price is 22 bushels and up. That's what our figures, our profitability maps show us. Why would you plant this unless you knew that canola was going to make you, it was going to be priced at 22 bushels and up? $22 a bushel. Sorry. So, I'm not going to take you through this, I don't have time, but I just want to show you we have a process where we take all of these field data and we've done this. This is a terrible map. Okay, so there's 60 places across, actually I'll show you a better picture, let's get to that. Okay, so we found 60 places across the prairies, 60 growers who are cooperating with us, and they've shared, through Saskatchewan and Alberta, they've shared their precision yield data. We have 600,000 acres of precision yield data from those farmers, and I'm working with colleagues at the University of Saskatchewan, myself at the University of Calgary. We're setting out in the Prairie Precision Sustainability Network to map profitability across the entire prairies, and we're 2 years into it. We've got some money, the federal minister mentioned the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund. We got some money from them to do this. Environment Climate Change Canada has also been supporting us. We've had support from Ducks Unlimited as well to do this work, to support their Marginal Areas program. And we're making great progress. And our goal eventually is to inform precision restoration. Finding those places where a farmer could say, I'm going to stop losing money. I'm going to square off my field. I'm going to restore that to something that is perennial. It could be trees, could be grasses, could be forages. I could graze it, I could hay it. I'm going to make sure those root systems grow deep. I'm going to make sure they sequester and store carbon below ground. They participate in reducing water overflow, flow, increase infiltration, do all those delicious good things. So messy fields can be created by restoring unprofitable seeded acres. And please, you can help us help producers do this. All what we need from you is your precision yield data. We have 2 fabulous people working with us at the University of Saskatchewan. Tamara and Andrea have left flyers on your table. They look like this. If you're interested in helping us, take the flyer, go to the website, do something, and get in touch. And we'd love to use your data because, as you can see from our map, our mandate is to do wall-to-wall for the prairies. We've only covered Alberta and Saskatchewan now. There's a big gap over here in Manitoba. And you folks can help us fill that to do precision restoration at scale. So what? We made messy fields. So what? getting at the end here, last slide. So what? Well, let's say we do this restoration. We make that stuff perennial. We achieve pollination services. These are the co-benefits. Pest control, co-benefits. And now we get to the benefits, the GHG ones. By putting perennials on those fields, we build long, deep root systems. And I know that regen ag ranchers are all about this. Carbon storage, carbon sequestration. It could happen across little pieces of every field across the entire Prairie Canada. That's a huge area. Water quality and regulation services, habitat, all the good stuff that I think many of you regen ag folks are here to hear about. It sounds a lot like regen ag. Messy fields are better for bees, they're better for natural enemies, they support higher crop yields, and we have a way to make them that saves money for farmers. Stop farming the parts of your field that are losing your money and turn it into an opportunity. And here's our bees. Pollinators in prairie landscapes are just where it starts. They like that ground. They need that ground. We need that ground too. Let's restore it. And everything I've talked about today is the work of other people in my lab. You can see some of their faces there, their names are there. We're the Agriculture, Biodiversity, and Conservation Lab, that's the A, B, and C lab. And we've been funded a lot by Canola Council, including Manitoba Canola Growers, Ducks Unlimited, have been key funders over the years. And with that, I'll shut up. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Paul. That was an amazing presentation. We don't often get to talk bees all the time. Now we'll open the floor up for a few quick questions. I know we're running a little behind schedule. Yeah, we can start.
Good morning. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I admire your energy. I love the presentation, so please don't misunderstand my comments.
Okay.
You're preaching to the choir, and I know you know that. You've mentioned it several times. So my real question derives at who decides where your research lies? And what we've heard so far here is that it is really important for farmers and ranchers to be able to tell their story. We heard Terry say this morning, tell your story, tell it over and over again, otherwise your story will be told by others. And if we can bridge the gap between the producer and the researcher, because just on my personal operation, we've been doing things like this for 35 years. What we know we're not good at is peer-reviewed research, right? Documentation. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence to support these claims. So, you know, I'm going to sound cynical by saying we know that research is driven by those who pay for it, but how do we bridge the gap between what we're doing on the ground and the research that supports it in a timely manner so that you aren't here talking to us, but you're out there talking to people who need to hear the message. So again, I really appreciate your presentation. Your energy was dynamic. There's a space in this world for you, but let's get the research. Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much for your comments. I want to say that I couldn't agree more with you that we absolutely need to leverage the expertise, not just in this room, but across the land, across the prairies. We're developing a new term. We're no longer calling this producer cooperators. They aren't people that are cooperating with the researchers. We're revisioning that in what we're trying to do, producer collaborators, right? This is about getting out there and bringing and doing the research with, not on the land, but with our collaborators. I think that is just, even the words matter, and changing those words, I think, is a key part of the story. One more thing I'll mention quickly is that in Alberta, we have this great organization. It's a grassroots organization called Rural Roots. to Climate Solutions, RR2CS. And Rural Routes to Climate Solutions, just a new thing, and they're all about regen ag. They're all about using the expertise of farmers to actually bring the story. And they have champions, they have farmers who tell their stories and tell the research story more broadly. Thank you so much for that question. It's important.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for the presentation. I'm a beekeeper and a farmer, so I really enjoyed what you had to say there. As much what I'm going to be talking about later on here too. This halo effect that you talk about is really interesting. I've never heard that put that way, but it really resonates. You especially see that in sunflower fields where the pollination is even more important to get the sunflowers pollinated. My question to you is about the difficult conversation with farmers in regards to pest management. So we're providing all the landscape to foster the beneficials, but that also fosters pests that take away yield from farmers, and that's where a real conflict happens between farmers and beekeepers especially. How would you, or how do you advise that conversation to happen?
Okay, so I mean, I think, well, first of all, we can talk about the research just briefly. There has been very little evidence that in the research studies that pests spill over from natural areas. In fact, there's definitely a perception that that happens, but when you go there to collect the data doesn't follow it up. In fact, I had a student who looked at this in Alberta, and we found virtually no evidence of the spillover of pests. We found leaf hoppers were spilling over. Leaf hoppers carry aster yellows, which can be important in a few cropping systems, but it's usually not a big yield loser. We found no other evidence of spillover of pests. In fact, many of the canola pests we looked at were at an even level across the landscape. So there's definitely the perception there. Now, there are probably parts of the prairies where spillover does occur of pests. Right? The thing is, it's not the same everywhere. It's different everywhere. But how important on average is that spillover going to be? I think the evidence is pointing to the fact that the beneficial spilling over is far more important in a positive way than those pests spilling over in a negative way. And the other part is weeds. Weeds sourced from natural areas are going to spill over into fields as well with their seeds. However, you're also getting weed seed eating beetles living in those places that are heading out there to eat the seeds. So it's ecosystems are this balancing act, right? And I'm not going to say that producer experience is wrong, that these areas are not sources for weeds and pests, but I don't think they are as important overall. I think we need local studies to show that variation. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Paul. Charlotte from Lex Unlimited.
Charlotte.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. I oversee our marginal areas program delivery in Galpern. And since 2020, we've seen great use of seed approximately 3,000 acres now under the marginal areas program. My question is specific to restoring those areas. We have a seed mix that we make available for guys that they want it. It's 14 perennial species that we mix that seems to do well in some like marginal areas. Do you have any suggestions as far as what we should move towards mix in some of those fringe areas that we can do?
Right. So what are we going to see when we do precision restoration? I mean, first of all, just a shout out to the Marginal Areas Program. Huge, great collaborators for us. Also really important in achieving these precision restorations. They don't use that term, but across much of the prairies. What would you plant? I think one of the things we're moving towards is you got to plant something that's local. You got to plant something that's tailored to the soil. And I think having these general, prescriptions about you must plant this or that, I think is not going to be helpful. I think we need very local agronomic focused solutions to planting forages, planting perennials that meet, whether it's a salinity problem or a dryness problem or a wetness problem, and it's also varies a lot across Canada. So I don't think there's one thing to see there, but thanks for that question.
Thanks for your presentation. A couple quick questions. One, how many invitations do you get to present this data to canola grower associations. There you go. And the other question is with regard to if you get a lot of messy areas created through your work here, that will, as you pointed out with Regen Ag, improve these messy areas as far as the soil quality and the productivity. How do you prevent farmers from just erasing those messy areas eventually and growing canola? Because those areas are now healthy and they will be productive because of the Regen Ag practices that are practiced there. Do you have a plan for that? Okay,
so first of all, responding to your canola question, yes, canola has been a major funder, including the Manitoba Canola Growers Association. And I speak about twice, maybe 2 or 3 times a year on this stuff. Canola has in the past sponsored me to do that. So I will accept any more invitations if anyone has anything for me. I'm very happy to talk more about this. But speaking of the reconversion back, I guess, back to crop, I still think that's a win. I really think that's still a win because we've taken land out of production for a short period of time. We've improved the soil because not all of those patches we are going to be able to regenerate. But if we can regenerate it, you know, in a 5-10 year period of growing perennials on it, then yeah, let's put it back into crop. And what we have overall, we have this constant dynamic, bits of fields coming into and out of production across the prairies. You have like this kind of moving dynamic network of conservation happening. So I don't see that necessarily as a problem. I just see it maybe as actually a feature in the sense that where it's possible to rehabilitate soil with this process, we can use that in some cases, and we also get the temporary benefit of that perennial carbon drawdown habitat.
I think we'll have to cut questions short for now. We're just running a little bit behind schedule, but please feel free to go and find Paul somewhere in the room later on and have a visit with him. And so with that, I would love to present you with this gift, Paul, and thank you for speaking here today. And some quick housekeeping notes. If you guys can all be back in the room by 10:50, and we'll try and keep our agenda rolling here. Don't forget to check out the trade show booths in the room. And we still haven't claimed our 50/50 ticket from yesterday, so I'll read out the number. It is a blue ticket, 553-03913. And so if anyone has claimed it, you can go to the registration desk and see John. And yeah, with that, we'll take a quick break and be back here at 10:50. Thank you.
Change. Some folks aren't that fond of it, but it's a different story on a Manitoba dairy farm. Change is normal, natural. You just have to get ready for it. But man, change can be cold. I like to think winter gives the land some time to rest. And then one day, slowly, everything starts to wake up. Then suddenly, change springs to life. You see, on a Manitoba dairy farm, winter isn't that cold when you know everything you do is all from a good place.
Most mornings, it's okay. Harder on the colder ones. But my cozy socks help. It's so quiet. Mom always leaves the light on for me. It's really early, but I really love it. 'Cause it's just Dad and me time. Even though I'm not a morning person. It's just us, the sun, when it's ready. The cows, Cookies, Stubbs, Nanny. Just wanted everyone to know that on a Manitoba dairy farm, we do it all from a good place to help make your place good too.
My name is Jeremy Lucier, owner-manager of Lucier Farms near Morse, Manitoba. I am the 4th generation farmer on this farm. I am currently with my 3 young children and my wife, and my mother is also involved in the farm. Overall, we farm 3,900 acres, and I've got 32 of those acres are under the Alice program, which is the lower spots of the farm that we typically can't access at seeding time in spring. My operation is a grain farm. We grow most of the cereals and oil seeds, which include wheat, oats, barley, corn, canola, soybeans, some alfalfa, some fall rye. How did I join this program? It was brought to me from a representative of the St. Roseau River District. Mentioned this program to me, and we went through the details, and it just made a lot of sense to jump on this program for several acres. Most of these acres are acres that are typically underwater in the spring. We typically cannot seed them at the proper time, and then we always have to come back to these acres once the water goes down. Typically not a good crop or not worth the headache. And the compensation from Alice just makes sense to put it in this grass and helps keep the water clean. As far as management practices for these acres, very minimal. Even though it gets flooded, it does not get drowned out. It comes back once the water sheds away. For 30 acres, it's maybe a day of work every year. I just have to cut it. And besides that, it's very, very easy and manageable. If anyone else in the community is thinking about the Alice program, I would strongly suggest it, especially if you have some areas that you can't do a whole lot with. It's a wetland, you just can't get equipment in there every time, every year, and on time. It just gives us another way to maximize the use of all of our acres. I'm hoping to use less, do more. The way the prices for fertilizers are now, it's becoming more and more attractive, these programs. So it'll take time to see, I guess.
Well, folks, just a quick announcement. The coffee's in the trade room if you want coffee. Once again, coffee in the trade room. Don't forget there's some morning munchies just at the back there if you want to help yourself.
Test, 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 test. Hello, everybody. Let's start making our way back to our tables, please, and we'll get into the next session. Where's that? You were over there, then you're over there. Wait till you get up here and get to look into this. It just feels like a freight train just coming down right at me. It's pretty, like I said earlier, it's like I'm getting tanned or something up here on this thing. It's pretty, it's a heat lamp. Okay, let's get into the next part. We got continuation of some really good presentations. That was wonderful from Paul. I do want to tip a hat here to someone. He's kind of a brainchild of this conference and kind of threaded it all together. The committee did a lot of work and had a lot of input, but I'd like Larry Wagner was the one that kind of threw together a lot of these marquee names and said, we'll have a good show if we have these people. And you're absolutely correct. This is wonderful, and thank you for your knowledge on putting that together. And of course, the committee's work and staff work to bring it out. But we need idea generators, and that's thank you very much, because I think the conference is just coming along. So thank you, Larry. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to bring up Zach Casilny now from Green Beach Farm, Strathclair, Manitoba. Zach's going to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Certainly had an interesting morning so far. Thank you, Paul. That was really good. I really enjoyed that. So I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker here, Ian Steppler. But I just wanted to run through a couple of things first. John has the 50-50, so I think we're still looking for a ticket there. So find Johnny's at the back. He's got his hand up there, so keep an eye on for him if you need. And for anybody looking to sort out their CEU credits, Denise at the table by the front door there is who you need to talk to for that. All right, so Ian Steppler, our next speaker. Married to Sandy, father of 5, farms with his family near Miami, Manitoba, Canada. His family farm is a 3rd-generation family farm. Ian and his family crop 4,000 acres of land, have 500 to 600 head of purebred Charolais cattle, and manage a 1,500 hive apiary. Since Ian bought his first 4 hives 23 years ago, he has dedicated his life passion towards beekeeping. Ian credits the current standing of his apiary to others on whom he has leaned on over the years. Ian is a big believer in paying it forward, which motivates him to share his successes and failures with others. Follow Ian's channel to submerge yourself in the world of a Canadian commercial beekeeper. And without further ado, come on up.
Thank you for that, Zach. I was telling Larry that Sandy and I just got back from Ames, Iowa, and we're at a beekeeper conference down there, and I was speaking, and we basically got out of the plane, drove straight here, found the hotel room, and then here I am again. I just about double booked this. But I have a YouTube channel, and this YouTube channel is basically a blog of mine that provides a perspective. I'm a farmer and I'm a beekeeper. I have my foot in the door of environment, and I have my foot in the door of development, and just that conflict. And I've been invited to beekeeping conferences right around North America to speak about that, just how we manage that, because people are so interested about it. And I assure you, they don't invite me in because of my brilliant speaking ability. You probably see my knees shaking right now. But they bring me in just to bring that perspective to the conversation. And I appreciate you inviting me to speak to you about that same conversation. When I generally speak to beekeepers about this, the crowd is receptive, but very challenging, because this is a hard topic to take as beekeepers. So usually when I go, I see a lot of conflict in the crowd, and it's a difficult crowd to talk to, but I'm looking across the audience here and you see a lot of happy faces. Generally, when when I speak, it is to beekeepers, but I do speak to some conservation groups, to farmers, and I love talking to farmers because I love getting the message out to the farmers, because that's the point. It's to bring that communication to the farmer, just let the farmer know what the problem is, and maybe together we can address it. So just a bit of an introduction to myself, so you know who I am and what I'm all about. My name's Ian Steppler, of course. Married to Sandy. We have a family of 5. Sandy's over in the corner here. She follows me along with all my convention presentations, so together we can get away from the farm sometimes and get a bit of relief from the family as well. So it's been nice. We're located near Miami, Manitoba. That's where our family farm is. I have my diploma of agriculture. I graduated in '99, and this is actually where I got my beginning in the business of beekeeping. Now, 24 years later, I'm a director of the Manitoba Beekeepers Association, and I'm the chairperson. I've been the chairperson for the last 2 years, conducting business on behalf of the industry. And part of the family farm. We farm 4,000 acres of cropland. Andre looks after the cattle farm. We farm together. We have about 650. Actually, I don't know how many cows he has. He can never tell me straight, but he has around 500 to 650 cows. And I manage the 1,500 hive apiary. So we're a 3rd generation farm, but a 1st generation beekeeper. So I brought the beekeeping industry or beekeeping business into the farm. I have an old, just to show you how long we've been here for about 100 years. Last year was our centennial. But we have an old combine, a 1949 Massey Harris combine, and my son sitting on that seat will be the 5th generation on that seat. So it's pretty special. We've been in the area for a long time, quite ingrained. That little blue dot in the picture, and that's our harvest field. That's my youngest daughter. And I just want to tell you this little story. My 5 kids, I've been able to hire 4 of them so far. She'll be number 5. And they all want their cell phone, right? And we won't pay for their cell phone plan, so Dad has a job, so they get a job on the honey farm. And my oldest daughter, she's in nursing right now. She's had a job on the farm for 5 years, but she's not working anymore because she's carrying on. And my second son, Michael, he's going into flight training and such. I have 2 more working for me, and she's not working for me yet because I have a rule that you have to be 15 years old to work on the honey farm, and she's just turned 13. And she sees her brothers and sisters going to the farm making some money, and she desperately wants a cell phone too, so she wants a job too, Dad. And every once in a while, when some of my crew doesn't show up, because I hire school students, so not really reliable, but the good workers all the same. So every once in a while, when somebody doesn't show up to work, I'll bring her along to the job site. And there's this one ride home. She's beside me in the seat beside me. And she's saying, yeah, Dad, this job isn't so bad. I said, yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's pretty rewarding. She says, this farm, who's going to take over the honey farm? And I said, well, I don't know, it won't be Lori, it won't be Michael now, but maybe Charlie or April, or maybe one of my nieces or nephews. And so she's thinking there a little bit. She says, Dad, you have a lot of work around here and you need some help, don't you? So I feel like I'm fishing and I'm reeling her in. So she said, you're gonna have to train me on that combine because next year I'm gonna be running that combine. And so here she is, I'm in the combine here, and she's walking up and I'm training her on that great big cat combine. And a bead of sweat going down my forehead. She's just a little wee tyke like that in a great big machine, and that responsibility, it's something that only a father training their kids can appreciate. But I got off the combine after about an hour and a half of guidance, and she's going up and down, and who knows, she might take over the farm, right? So Miami, Manitoba is right on 23 highway. We're 22 miles off the border. In Miami, there's a shot, and that's an old picture of Miami when the elevator was still there. But Miami's right at the base of the escarpment. I'm sure most of you here are familiar with Red River Valley, then the escarpment goes up. Actually, I delivered grain to that elevator when I was 15 years old, so I can proudly say I delivered to an old elevator. But our farm consists of some flat land like that, but also on the picture beside that is a picture I'm in the combine and I'm looking down the escarpment, and Miami's just in the distance. So Miami's right at the base of the hill. Our farm's on the top of the hill, and we kind of farm down the rolling hills down to Miami. So we have very a diverse topography on our farm. When we were still part of the Pembina Valley Conservation District, they presented our farm with a conservation award back in, boy, time flies. It's been back in 2018. And our farm does have a conservation perspective and spirit, but they presented this award to us because we brought more conversation. We brought a different perspective to the conversation, much of what Paul was talking about here earlier. That conversation of preserving diversity, right? All those dynamics around wildlife and specifically pollinators, because I'm a beekeeper. And with that, and through my channel, my YouTube channel, I'm always talking about that interaction between the environment and development, right? Those two opposing forces, and how our farm, all three enterprises, work together to interact to make it all work, right? It's a hard conversation. That's what I bring to the table. So in this presentation, I'd like to bring you sustainability from a beekeeper's vantage point. So I'm going to identify some of our challenges, and I'm also going to provide you with some strategies, solutions, and efforts we do as a farm to be able to overcome some of these challenges. So I was just down in Iowa, and their farmland is pretty much the same as ours up here, except they're more corn and soybeans. Up here we have more diversity. We have canola, we have alfalfa, we have sunflowers, so we just have a little bit more variety. And down there I was listening to one of their professionals, professor, talking about losses, and I'm sure all of you have heard about bee losses, and everybody's asking me about these losses and what's causing these losses. Well, that professional, the professor was saying, no, not the professor, the state inspector was saying, year after year after year after year, they send out a survey, and the same one that was sent out to Manitoba here, and there's 5 or 6 reasons why beekeepers identify for losses in honeybees. It's always disease pressure, pesticide exposure, nutrition, weather issues, and our own beekeeping. I put the beekeeping management in there because sometimes we've got to point the finger at ourselves too, right? There's always those top 5. In this presentation, I'm going to speak exclusively on one of them, which is nutrition. And to do that, just to help you understand what I'm trying to say, I'm going to step you through one of my years as a beekeeper, just show you what's going on and help you understand what we're doing and what I'm trying to say our problem is, and then solutions to address those problems. So it all starts inside, and this is what my winter shed looks like right now. I have all my bees moved from the yards into my winter shed just to protect them from the harshness of our winter weather about to hit us. Got them all stacked up. And now being November, but fast forward to, let's say, March, middle of March, even April. This is when I start moving my colonies outside. And as you can see, on my colonies here, there's bearding. There's bees in the front. There's bees starting to come out of the boxes. They've been inside for 5.5 months without flight. They're getting very anxious, kind of jittery. I kind of think of these bees being locked inside for 5 months through winter, the same as my kids. Come spring, my kids want nothing but to get outside, right? Because they've been cooped up inside all the time, so they just want to get outside. Same with my bees. They can smell that spirit of spring, and they just want to get outside. So once they start telling me that they want to get out and start flying, generally the temperature in the shed starts to warm up, and I have trouble keeping them inside their boxes, so I move them outside into my yards. Everything's palletized. Thank goodness. It takes a lot of the grunt work away from what we're doing now as beekeepers. And I generally move them out at night. First off, because in spring we start to lose the frost. I don't like getting stuck at night because my brother's I have to phone my brother, okay, I'm stuck, can you come pull me out? And he's not very receptive on the other side of the phone. So I like to move out when I know I'm not going to get stuck. It's generally at night when the frost sets back into the ground. And also because the bees don't fly in the dark, right? So they've been 5.5 months indoors in the dark and they're just ready to fly. So here's a picture of a little video of one of my yards in the spring. It's when I set them outside. How do I get that to play? So there we go. So here's a yard that I just set out. And typically I have 5 yards to set my bees out into. But this particular spring, it was a wet spring. I couldn't access those yards, so I found a gravel pit, 1,500 colonies all in one yard. And this is the first day of flight after I put them inside. You have to appreciate that when bees, they need to poop, just like every 5 months they're hanging on. They're hanging on, right? They're hanging on for dear life. And finally, can you play that again? So finally, when they get them outside, they see that first light, they get up and they fly. Hundreds of thousands of bees, the first flight, up in the air, flying and pooping. And it's a literal shitstorm. There's bee poop flying absolutely everywhere. It's an amazing spectacle. These bees will go up and they'll go and they'll relieve themselves, clear themselves out, go back down into their colony nest, and then resume typical flight to go forage. It's one of my favorite times in the year, is this point in time right here. All those miserable jobs of beekeeping, I keep thinking to myself, this point in time, I really enjoy this, and I come and I watch this spectacle. Something that amazes me every year and just brings the awe and inspiring nature back to the business here. Just really enjoy it. So if you ever know a beekeeper setting their colonies outside after a long winter, just kind of tag along. You might want to stay in your truck because bee poop tastes absolutely terrible. It takes about 2 or 3 days before they actually get themselves cleaned out until we can get down into the yards and work with them. Here we go. So I want to show you this just to kind of provide a bit of an example of what goes on within the year. This is a graph that's put together and it shows a lot of things. So January to December at the bottom, so that's throughout the year. And it shows the size of the colony throughout the different points in the year. You'll see where we are in November on the other side. The nest is a little bit smaller and the age represents in color there. The bees are starting to get older as they follow through winter. And then there's this point of inflection when there's a bit of challenge. And then once you get into spring, you can see their populations explode into growth. And that's when we collect these huge honey crops. So right at this point in time where I have the arrow, is typically when we take our colonies out of the sheds. And it's when they start developing their springtime nests. And this is probably, and as you can see in the graph, this is probably one of the most important times for a honeybee colony. As you can see, the age is getting older and older. We set them outside. All of a sudden, the death rate increases dramatically. And then it flips up like this into youth. Right? This is when the wintertime nest, the old winter bees, the ones that are up there flying and pooping, the old winter bees, this is when they flip themselves into spring. And they do that by mining the resources off their bodies. And as they mine these resources off their bodies, they're building the new generation ahead of them. And as they do that, they completely zap that long-lived ability to survive, right? So they're on a time clock. When they put them outside, they start brooding, they mine their bodies off. It's pretty tight. They have to be able to rear that next generation of brood in 3 weeks before they die. Very important point of time. But you can see when they do it successfully, they slip right back up into the springtime nest, nice and young, and there's nothing but growth after that. It's an absolute amazing point of time. It's a very challenging point of time for a beekeeper. So when we set them outside, we start supplemental feeding them. We'll provide them liquid feed
sugar. That's what the bees, that's their energy source, is sugar. And we'll feed them protein patties. That protein patty is just to stimulate, that's the food. The proteins are food to build the bees. And we're feeding that protein to them to complement the natural pollen and nectar coming into the nests. As beekeepers, the supplement we feed our bees is an incomplete feed. We can't replace it active pollen. The bees need pollen to build to fulfill the development throughout the entire year. We can't build bees longer than 2 weeks, not 2 weeks, 2 generations of bees. We can't build bees on protein supplement. No matter how much money and academic study has gone into this, they can't crack the code to be able to develop bees on something other than pollen. It's one of the crutches of our industry right now. We can't replace pollen. We need pollen. If I can reinforce something, this is something that's absolutely essential, not only to my business, for these bees to thrive, but for these bees to actually survive. I think of the cattle farm where we bring in feeds and we provide the rations and the diets through winter to be able to get them through. And the cattle take all that food and they process it in their stomachs, right? And they make available all the nutrients they need themselves in their stomachs. The bees, in a way, do the same thing, but it's not so much in their stomachs. They use the entire environment to do that. Their entire environment is what digests the proteins into usable nutrients. And a lot of it, like, this is where the conversation gets a little deeper between beekeepers. And this is just, hypothesis or theory or whatever you call it. But it's in an act that pollen grain is a living organism in a lot of ways when you think about it. And what it is the microbes on the pollen grain that the bees bring in from everywhere, this huge dynamic of ingestion of different bacteria that come into the bee's gut, and it continually cultures that microbiome within their gut. And it's that microbiome that digests the proteins into usable nutrients. So that's how important, if you think of the honeybee's stomach, it's not just their stomach, but it's the environment around them. Everything's going on around them is directly reflective to what goes on within these honeybees. So pollen is our bees' primary source of nutrients. It is the proteins, lipids, fats, vitamins, sterols, minerals, micronutrients. Every pollen source provides a different nutritional value. So I don't expect you to take notes or anything, but this is just an example of the importance of the honeybee, just like every other animal, that they need a balanced diet. Those essential amino acids, they need to be in a certain balance to each other to provide a proper diet for the honeybee. And this is what they're continually striving as they're bringing in all that natural protein from the environment. And this I don't expect you to read, but this is just what I want to show you the different nutritional values of every pollen source out there in the countryside. So if you could read that, it's telling you that poplar and willow and apple, clover, canola, alfalfa, those are all pollens that have a balanced protein profile for the honeybee. So those are very nutritious. So they can use those to be able to, succeed their generations as far as they want to take it. There's other pollens out there, sunflowers and dandelions and buckwheat and blueberry. They're very unbalanced in their profiles. So if that was their only food, they would starve. Right? And I'm looking across the landscape, and when I see yellow lawns, it makes me a happy person. I don't let Sandy mow or lawn through the dandelion bloom because I think a yellow lawn is a productive lawn, is because as a beekeeper, I'm making money at that, right? All these flowers, all this pollen and all this nectar coming in, my hives just explode in growth. But you look back at that graph and you notice dandelion is unbalanced. And yet as a beekeeper, I see this tremendous growth when dandelion starts to bloom. So what's going on there? So what the bees are doing is they're taking that tremendous resource, the pollen and nectar from the dandelions, an unbalanced protein profile, and they're mixing it off of the apple pollen or other higher protein balanced pollen sources. They're mixing it all up, and they're using it that way to balance out the protein profile. And I kind of equate it to when I go up to a buffet, I put meat and potatoes on my plate because I could eat meat and potatoes every day. But my wife is beside me and she puts all the greens on there and the fruits and the vegetables, right? Sandy's just balancing my diet. The same way the bees do it with the pollen. They just kind of bring in all sources they can find and they just mix it together to provide that balanced protein profile. So in the spring, as our hives are growing and they're foraging, as a beekeeper, we're busy managing our colonies for growth. And the bees are out there and they're busy foraging the pollen and the nectar to grow their colonies. And I want to show you a bit of an example of what I'm talking about in regards to pollen availability and how the bees access that pollen to grow their colonies. Mother Nature has done it just an absolute perfect way, a perfect job setting this up for them. She's in a way set the plate for these honeybees or native pollinators to access the food they need to grow and develop throughout the year. So we're in November, we're way down here, and we're going to go through an extended period of dearth. November, December, January, February. We're going to set our bees out in March, but it's not until April when we start seeing real pollen flows into the colonies. And you remember that inflection in the spring I was showing you where there's that downward death rate as they're flipping that old winter nest into spring? They use all the pollen, all the protein available to them at that point in time to be able to make that conversion. They're hinging on the pollen available to them to be able to take that old nest and flip it into a young springtime nest. They're using poplar to do that. They're using willow, wild plum, maple. Very, very high protein sources for the bees. Very nicely balanced and mixed. And then they go into May and they have this glut of dandelion fall in their laps. And they use that glut of dandelion, mix it off with Saskatoons, apple, pears, chokecherries, hawthorns. Very abundant time in the year for the honeybee when they have available protein at them at all times. So as beekeepers, we feed patties to provide bulk nutrients at that same time. And we're doing it to complement that incoming pollen. So as beekeepers, we recognize that there's times within the spring that the bees are going to fall into deficit. It could be weather, but also could be that there's just a lack of that available pollen out there for them to collect. Right? So what we do is we feed them a protein source to provide them the bulk nutrients to use to help build these nests. But we're not naive enough to think that the patties are going to provide a complete diet, and we're hinging on that pollen available to be able to mix together to help build these nests out. And as the hives grow, we focus on building new colonies. This is a picture of a real good colony. There's a frame full of brood. There's probably 4 or 5 of them in there. And what's just about to happen here is all those brood cells, they're about to emerge, little baby bees, just about to emerge. And it's going to turn a colony of, let's say, 5,000 bees into 15 or 20,000 bees, just like that. It's an amazing time of year, hard to keep up. And what we do as beekeepers is we try to then take this strength and build colonies with it for replacements and such. So we go through and we pull some of that strength and we make up new colonies. Here's a picture of one of my workers going through. It's a terrible amount of work. There's so much work. We work long hours trying to keep ahead of these bees. But we'll basically just pull strength, surplus strength from the big colonies, and we're making up smaller units to build as death deaf loss replacement, or to expand our operations, or to make sales. So we'll pull, let's say we make 2-frame brood splits into a bunch of nukes, and we'll drop a queen cell in there. It's a picture of a queen cell. Not very many people have actually seen a queen cell, but what we do is we take an egg, which would be normally turned into a worker bee, but we put it into an environment that turns it into a queen bee. So we have queen building colonies specifically dedicated to making queen bees for us. So this is a queen cell. You can see at the bottom, it's just about ready to emerge, and she'll emerge into one of our colonies that we just made up. She'll go out and fly and mate, and then I'll have a nice healthy little unit ready to go. The reason why we put so much attention towards that is because if we don't harness that strength, if we don't use it, what the bees will do is they naturally swarm. This might be familiar to some of you guys who have seen honeybees hanging from the trees. And what's going on here is what the bees are doing is that expansive growth I was explaining to you, where it turns from 5,000 to 15,000 bees like that. This is when they will actually naturally propagate. This is when they split their colonies off naturally to form new colonies. And what they do is they pretty much just take the old queen, half the population, and they fly away. And what they'll do is they'll fly away onto a branch like this, and they'll hang there until they can stage to find a new location to be able to raise their nest. It's actually an amazing thing, because what happens, they'll hang onto this tree branch, and they send out little scout bees. I don't know how many they send out, but let's say they send out 2 scout bees. One scout bee will go around, she'll find a, let's say an old barn cavity, another one will fly over and she'll find like a tree cavity or something. So those 2 scout bees will come back and land onto that cluster. And those 2 scout bees will actually campaign to convince that cluster of bees where to go. And if that scout bee, the one who campaigns to get 80% of those bees in that cluster to agree with them, that's where those bees are going to fly off to establish a new nest. So they're like little politicians in a lot of ways, right? Campaigning and pounding the table. This is where we need to go. This is where we have to go. And once they make their decision, 80% seems to be that threshold. Once they make that decision, the bees get all excited. They stir up, they start flying. And maybe you've seen a swarm flying through the air before. It's very intimidating to somebody who's not a beekeeper. There's an amazing thing when I watch it. The bees will get up and they'll fly this great big mass of bees, and they'll push and punch that queen on that branch to get her up and flying, and they'll actually nudge that queen through the air all the way until they find their new location to settle in, and then they'll build their new nest. So it's quite an amazing thing. But as beekeepers, we don't want to see that. We don't want that to happen because we don't make money with bees hanging on trees. We want to keep the bees in the boxes back behind like this where we can manage them and, produce honey. So back to my calendar. So we've gone through spring. What have we done? So we've been able to grow these colonies out of winter. We've taken them through spring. We've taken off the split. I'm growing out new colonies, replacing losses, hopefully, and then looking forward to summer. And that's when we just see this abundance of flowers for us to be able to capitalize on. Alfalfas, clover, canola, sunflower, right? And when that countryside starts to flower, this is when we start stacking the boxes on as beekeepers. This is when we start seeing us drive our trucks around with all these empty boxes, and little colonies turn into big colonies, just because we have so many flowers across the countryside. I have a 1 box per week rule in the height of the honey flow with all of the canola, clover, and alfalfa out there. We have to make sure we stay ahead of the colonies with the space, because they'll fill 1 box of honey every week. And I'm just going to step you quickly through here just to show you what we're doing as we're collecting the honey. So here's a picture of my guys working. These boxes are heavy. Every box is about 80 pounds. So if you look at a stack, 1, 2, 3, 4, he's carrying 4 there on that lift, 240 pounds. There'd be about 160 pounds of honey in that stack of boxes. Very heavy work. So I've invested into an easy loader, this boom, articulating boom, and it allows me to hire people who aren't, a beekeeper's best friend is that ox of the kid, the Dr. Claw, but those guys that can carry 2 or 3 boxes at a time. But I hire any kid that wants a job on the farm, so I've implemented a means of allowing them onto the farm, so you don't have to be strong to be able to do the work on the farm. We can employ methods like this to be able to manage all that heavy lifting. So at any rate, we're lifting those boxes off the hive because we need to clear the bees from those boxes. And the way we do it is with a very non-invasive way. So we lift the honey boxes off, which are full of bees and full of honey, and we need to get rid of the bees. We'll come and we'll slap in 2 empty boxes. The brood chamber in the bottom, empty box, empty box. That's where that one of the kids is working there. They're putting 2 empty boxes in. And then that gray thing in the hive beside is an escape board. And that escape board is like a one-way, one-way thingamajigger. It has cones in there that allow the bees down and through, but they're not smart enough to figure their way back up and in. So throughout the next 2 days that I leave these escape boards in, the bees will naturally cycle from the top boxes down to the brood boxes. The bees need to touch the queen or touch another bee that touched the queen every day pretty much. So they're wanting to go down. And also when the forager bees are coming in from the field, they have this huge payload of nectar in their stomachs, and the forager bees will come to the front step, and they don't deposit the honey. It's the processor bees, the ones that just about to start to fly, but they haven't started flying yet. So the processor bees will gather that nectar off the front from the forager bees, and they'll bring it up and store. So there's a natural cycle like this in the colony all day long. And by putting that one-way board in, I take advantage of that natural cycle. I cycle the bees out of the top box. So then we come in 2 or 3 days after all those bees are cycled down, and we basically do the same thing, but we just strip all those boxes off the top onto the truck and back to the honeyhouse to extract. So back in the honey house, we have an extractor. This is a 60 frame count extractor, the Cooks and Beals wax separator. This allows me to pull roughly 300 boxes of honey out per day. So I keep 3 or 4 school kids in here busy every day extracting honey. I'll fill one of those milk tanks up twice every day. So we're producing roughly 22 drums of honey, 20 to 22 drums of honey. So that's about 12 to 15,000 pounds every day. So it allows us to get the work done. And I like to just love telling the story. There's a picture of Grandpa filling our drums in the honey house. There was a time that Grandpa's a farmer, he always was a farmer, and he's getting older, and he's having trouble finding a place in the farm. And he's in the honey house one day, and he seen me filling a drum of honey. But I got distracted, and I walked away for just an instant. I looked back, and the drum of honey was spilling over, and God damn. So, can't sell honey on the floor, it goes into the drain. Grandpa said, there you go, here's a place for me. So he went and grabbed a chair, he slid it over, and he grabbed an empty drum, and he started filling drums for me. So he did that for 10 years, helping me fill drums, and he never spilt a drop of honey the entire year he was there, the entire time he was there. And when he passed when he was 96, I think, he just about made 97. But he worked filling drums till he was 96, and Grandpa passed away. That next summer, I spilled honey again. So we sure miss Grandpa in the honey house. So this is where that's the fun part of the presentation. This is where I wanted to talk to you about, this is more of the business part of the presentation. So I'll be doing a little bit more reading here. But the landscape turns into abundance. All this abundance of clover and canola and alfalfa. It transforms into trillions of nectar-producing flowers. Just an amazing thing. If I want to put some stats on that, do some math. It takes 550 bees to gather 1 pound of honey from 2 million flowers. my 1,500 hive operation uses 150 million bees to collect 285,000 pounds of honey off 570 billion flowers. So that's just my operation honeybee footprint. So to equate that across Manitoba, our Manitoba hive count is 115,000 hives. And that's maybe not as, we've had 2 bad years in the honeybee business with losses. We're climbing back up to that number, but had some trouble. But let's work on 115,000 colonies, which annually produce 15 million pounds of honey. So we're a $25 to $30 million industry. That $20 to $30 million industry makes our industry relevant to the conversation of agriculture. And I can't see Patty because of the light, but I know she's back there. Every time I bug Patty on the phone, you know, it's important because we mean a difference into the agricultural landscape, right? So we can't forget we have a value there we're contributing, and that's just honey production. So if those bees collect from 8.2 billion bees collect off of 30 to 40 trillion flowers within the Manitoba landscape. That Manitoba honeybee pollination footprint represents $150 million directly into farmers' pockets due to increased crop production just from the simple act of pollination. That's a huge number from 250 beekeepers in Manitoba. That's what we represent, is a value added to the agricultural economy. And this is where we encounter a balance within the countryside of nature and agriculture. Agriculture blooms for 1 month of the year, but extremely intense. And that's important to us as a beekeeper because that's where we get our honey flow from. Nature blooms all season long, but gradual and planned out. That's what helps us grow and develop and maintain our hives. So where we find this balance within the countryside of agriculture and nature is where we find tremendous growth and prosperity. And it's something our farm takes very seriously as we work to manage our lands in a sustainable fashion. Because agriculture is changing. There's research and development invested in agriculture which would have been unmanageable to generations before us. I mean, I can just imagine what Grandpa, who was barreling my honey there, can just imagine what he thinks about the transition and the progress we've made within our agricultural industry. There's technology available for us at our fingertips, and it absolutely boggles my mind. Chemistries we have available to us to build a farm our lands, plant breeding. I mean, we're growing corn in our farm on top of the escarpment. We're 1,600 feet above elevation, 72, 73-day corn, and we're pulling 180 pound or 180 bushel crops off that. I mean, something like that would hardly be achieved 20 years ago. We have GPS and automation, just the efficiencies brought into what we do. We have bigger farm machinery. We have bigger farm machinery, and it allows us the ability to bring efficiency and precision to what we do as farmers. And it's changed the landscape. And I always argue it's not the GM technology or the Roundup Ready technology that's killing honeybees. It's the GM technology and the Roundup Ready technology that is stripping the landscape of the diversity that is providing a state of malnourishment of our honeybees, which is then in turn one of the reasons why we're seeing death in our colonies. My brother, he's manages a grain farm and he calls them weeds, right? And I call those weeds bee food. Just a different perspective of looking at that foreign crop. Another time in history, we managed our crops paying so much attention towards that individual plant. My brother farms that row crop planter. It's almost like he's taking a seed and putting it in the ground like that, right? And we're doing the same with chemical farming. It's allowing us to achieve that micromanagement of every plant. We manage seed-borne diseases with seed treatments, seedling growth diseases with fungicides, weeds with herbicides, blight issues with fungicides. We use growth regulators for a number of reasons. We time maturity with desiccants. We control perennial weeds with post-harvest treatments. The technology advances have allowed farmers to manage losses with a detailed and expensive protective crop program. Larger equipment means larger fields. GPS, everything starts to get straighter. This year I was on the speed disc and the GPS didn't work. I was just on the speed disc. And I was chilling like this, and it just drove my brother crazy. He almost made me redo it because it wasn't straight lines anymore. And systems start to appear in the field as trees start to disappear. As we start, in a way, managing the natural aspect out of the equation. Here's one of our harvest fields when we had the deer combines. And it's a fun thing because we start seeing systems appear in the field. Straight lines back and forth, combines, and then the grain cart chasing them. And as soon as you put an obstacle in the way, then all of a sudden they get a turn, and it just takes that process out of whack. And especially spraying too, we have a half section of cropland that used to have a tree break right in the middle like this and a slough on the other side. That tree line is gone, and we've drained the slough. And now we can spray that field in half the time. Just makes all the difference to a farmer. Our ability to clear, flatten, drain land, and it's provided us access to properties we've typically left for pastures. Now my brother, he has to rent pastures up in other areas because we're actually pulling his pastures away from him, right? Just because we can invest the money to be able to farm that land, and the investment into that property is a lot less than what we buy new property for. That's just economics. That's all there is to it. And our landscape has transformed. This isn't a picture of our field, but this is a picture. I found this on Google. Don't tell anybody, but pretend this is a spitting image of one of our fields. Nothing but a tree growing right in the center. We manage the land. We rent it from another guy, our neighbor, and he says, you can farm the land, you can farm it even for a great rent price. And he said, if you touch that tree in the middle of that field, then you're going to lose your contract with me. He calls it the hitching tree. Right? Whatever. I think back in the day when they used to run harvest fields with horses, this is where they used to hook up the horse. It's just absolutely ridiculous, really, when you think about it. The landscape we used to have covered in trees and biodiversity, and now we have a hitching tree just all by itself in the middle of the field. This is what our farm is doing. Farmers have been able to do exactly what farmers have been born to do: improve our lands, kill weeds, protect growth, grow big yields. And I'm not saying this available technology is wrong. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And this is where the conversation, this is when the beekeepers I have in the crowd start to get angry at me. When I say that exact sentence, that turns that friendly crowd into an angry crowd to me. Because what it has done is it's brought profitability back into farming, right? And it has helped our farm keep solvent. I am, however, pointing out the problem that has now been created. Monoculture is slowly stripping the diversity away from our countryside. And I think farmers are seeing that too. So we'll go back to this calendar, and I'll show you kind of an exaggerated example of what's going on right now in the honeybee industry. So those bees come out of winter, and when they start to grow and develop, they start searching for the pollen to be able to use that. And they're not finding it. They can't find it because we're managing the land so intensively. The willows, the poplar, the willows, the scarcity of all the pollen that are available to flip that winter nest into that spring nest isn't there. That's what they need to be able to grow and develop their colonies. A very important time in the year when you think back to that graph where I show you that point of inflection, the point of stress. They're having trouble making that conversion from winter nest into the springtime nest because they don't have the tools to be able to do it anymore. They're losing their access to all the pollen. Then come summer, and we just have the lawns to be able to gather dandelions off of that glut of pollen that we used to have. They're actually having trouble finding it. Not only that, but to mix it off with, to balance out that diet. And then they go into the summertime period, where you get that heavy flow of agriculture, and that hasn't changed. That's still there. A little bit of clover, a canola crop, sunflowers. Go into the fall, and we're just struggling to find anything to provide nutrition for our bees. So you hear a conversation from a beekeeper who's experiencing a lack of nutrition like this, and they're like, how's your colony doing? They're just so hard done by, they just don't seem to be growing, and I just can't figure it out, you know, I'm doing everything I can, and they're just poor doing bees. Until June comes around, when they're like, finally my bees have picked up, yeah, they're looking really good, they're starting to grow again, I'm expecting to get some honey off these hives. But by the time the colonies actually are able to achieve the growth that they need to build the populations, to be able to bring in that massive crop, they're at the far end, the back end of the honey flow, and they end up with a very small crop because they missed it. The bees needed to be building during April, May. That's when we need to set these colonies up to be able to capitalize on all that growth. We can't be building into June and July and August, because that's when we need to capitalize on the crops that are out there. So if you're seeing a bit of a balance to the equation that we're experiencing in the beekeeping industry. Malnourished animals are sickly animals, right? That's an example of what you typically would think of a malnourished cow. That's not what our cows look like. Let's say that one of the neighbors' cows looks like that. But that's you can see a malnourished animal just by the unfit nature of it. You can't see that with a honeybee, or not as easily. Malnourished bees, they're sickly bees, and they're unable to cope with stress factors. Those stress factors being parasites, pesticide exposure, be it from farmer or from the beekeeper themselves to control those parasites. Viral infections, you have fungal infections, weather troubles, winter. It all contributes to a stress put on onto those bees. And when they're malnourished, they get negatively affected to it because they can't handle all those situations anymore. So we're creating an imbalance across our landscape. But as farmers, we're just doing our damn job, right? We're doing a good job of it too. We're feeding the world. It's very important. See, this is where the conflict comes into my farm, because I'm a farmer too, and I understand these pressures put on farmers. I'm in that same combine, and I'm looking into that same grain bin as the rest of you. Every time I look back into that grain bin, I'm always thinking, there should be more grain in that tank. Sometimes in those poor years, we'll actually go to the combine to see, is there a hole in this combine or something? Because the tank's not filling up the way it should be. In the back of my mind, in the back of the mind of every farmer, they're thinking to themselves, we need more grain in that tank. Because the fertilizer bill is due, and I need another fuel drop, and I got to fix that flat tire in the auger, and the load of gravel from Colette's, I got to pay that. And payroll's on Thursday, and maybe I shouldn't up the internet service because I bought that HD TV and hydro and the phone bill and the water service and the land taxes and payment of the tractor of $23,000 is due next week, and the rent and the debt and the cash flow, and the bank had just called again, and my youngest daughter is pleading for a horse, and horses are expensive. I mean, all these things that we're thinking as farmers as we're trying to maintain our operations and the profitability of our livelihood. This is extremely important, because every time I look back in that grain tank, that exact thought process follows through my mind. We need more grain in that tank. And that's the pressures we're putting on as farmers to grow more is by taking advantage of all these technologies available to us. And it puts me into a dilemma. My bees need space and need diversity of flowering plants or weeds. My bees need nature to exist and sustain colony and maintain their growth. My bees need reprieve from the continual chemical exposure. My bees need farmers to farm, and I need those trillions of flowers through the summertime to gather my crop. My grain farmer, on the other hand, needs to adopt the latest technology to glean the efficiencies. My farm needs to control all the weeds, diseases, insect populations. My farm needs to manage noxious weeds around the edges. My farm needs to utilize the land and improve the soils to increase revenues per acre. That's all there is to it. So beekeepers, in a way, need to understand that we need to farm. That's not being removed from the equation. And farmers need to understand that nature must exist. So we need to work to find that balance. So what is being done? What is our farm doing to address this dilemma, this impossible situation? Our strategy on the farm is not to interfere with what's going on within their managed fields, because we need to farm, and we understand that. We need to adopt all the technologies to farm better. We need to grow crops. And I mean, if we are going to change the system that we have, it's been developed over the last 80 years, and it's not going to take 3 years to kind of evolve away from that. So our farm is strategized to focus around the edges. Around the edges, ditches, sloughs, wetlands, riparian areas, pastures, preserving those little pockets of the natural world across the countryside. And we found by preserving those little aspects around the edges, just like the last presentation was given, with diversity scattered throughout, this is all we, as a beekeeper, this is all we really need. We need that flow pollen coming in so the bees have access to that spirit of the natural world, and then we can, maybe complement it with the supplements there on top of it. Pollinators need that pollen to survive, and even if it's just a little bit, we can then supplement it with the rest of the feed. Our farm, we hold a large, it's about 500 acres of a ravine, untouched in its natural state. Really beautiful, really. And a lot of farmers will look at that untouched land as being unproductive, but as a beekeeper, I look at that, and it is one of the most profitable areas on our farm just by the resource it provides for our honeybees, because my honeybees bring a lot of money into the farm. So by being able to grow the colonies on natural property, especially in the spring, I'm able to grow very healthy colonies to be able to capitalize on that crop. We also manage our lands to preserve natural waterways, maintain riparian buffers. We participate in the Deerwood Soil and Water Small Dams Project. Some of you will be familiar with that. We have about 5 dams located on our land to hold back headwater from the spring melt. And what it does, we're right on top of the escarpment, and you have that huge flow of water, the meltwater. What it does is it holds back about 25% of that headwater. So then there isn't that sudden surge to take out the infrastructure below the hill. And it works very well. But we also use it to be able to tap into using these as little pockets of marshland, right? We manage them as wetlands, providing vegetation for my bees, but also more importantly, pockets of water. For anything to live, we need access to water, and we're losing those little spots of water across the countryside, which the natural world needs to live, to survive. They can't survive without water. Honeybees need a tremendous amount of water. It's surprising how much water they need. So we need to provide them access to that. Same with any other living animal. We manage more sensitive lands as pastures or rotational graze. And we'll manage the paddocks to the sensitive lands. We won't manage as intensively, but the more productive land we'll manage more intensively. I've seen an opportunity here as a beekeeper to provide my bees with pollen throughout the entire year. So what I did is I went into one of Andre's pastures and I started growing clover, sweet clover specifically. And what was going on, sweet clover is very highly nutritious pollen, lots of nectar. And I didn't put a lot of it in, but I just sprinkled it through the pastures. And when Andre rotated the pastures, so the cows would chew down the one paddock, he'd move them out into another paddock and leave this one regrow. And after it rained, that paddock would grow back. All those clover plants just all of a sudden shot up brand new fresh flowers. Right? Andre had rotated around. And in the sense of the cattle will always pick the grass first, chew down the grass, and almost suck the flowers off these clover plants, rotate them out. And after rain, just new flower growth again. And what it did is provided my colonies not so much honey crop through the entire year, but just access to that essential pollen that they need to be able to grow and develop their colonies, highly nutritious, all the way through the year. And we manage our ditches to promote all types of clovers, alfalfas, and wildflowers. And I see this as being one of the places where we could focus more attention on establishing diversity across the landscape. It's a 1 mile grid right across the countryside. Right? It's King's property now. I don't believe we spend enough attention towards managing our ditches. It's a tremendous land resource that we could instantly turn around to address the loss of biodiversity right across the landscape on a grid, But it requires effort. It requires a lot of effort, and sometimes effort requires cost. We need to improve more drainage. We need more mowing. We need more attention put towards controlling noxious weeds. We need more attention put towards preserving that natural growth. And I always argue that this could be a place, if society actually give a damn, this could be a place where they could put the money invested to achieve something, right? Something tangible, actually something that will work, providing more flowers to provide more food for the bees, honeybees, and the native pollinators. But this causes conflict too, because life's all about trade-offs. So you switch one thing, then you have another problem. I keep my bees, or one of my yards of bees, on the guy that actually sprays our ditches. And he says, Ian, you gotta be careful the way you talk about this, because I hear your tone, and I hear you say that we need to put more effort into this, and we need to get more creative. And he said, I'm spraying, I'm just doing my job. Don't treat me like an idiot. And I'll talk to my municipality, and they tell me much the same thing. He says, Ian, when you stop spraying the ditches the way you're talking about, just look at your ditches, and all of a sudden all the bulrushes start to grow, and then the noxious weeds aren't being controlled anymore. And they say to me, are you going to pay for the cost of that? They point their finger at me. And say, well, no, I can't. And that's ridiculous, really, right? But I think as society, we need to be able to think outside of the box. And if we actually want to achieve something, then we need to focus on opportunities like this and maybe try to address the situation by being more creative, right? And I really believe in this, and it's not anything new. Pollinator Partnership, they're an organization developed dedicated exclusively towards promoting pollinator habitat. They have dedicated their time towards pollinator protection initiatives, and one of these initiatives is roadside ditch management. So there's a template they put in place just to help provide some guidance. If this is what we wanted to achieve, we could use this resource to help us achieve that outcome. Another thing we do, something interesting, is I participated in the U of M pollinator strip study. And what they did is I won't talk specifically about the program, but I'll talk about my experience of the program. They I had to convince my brother to set aside just a little bit of land along one of our fields so he didn't crop it. And then what they did is they come in with a bunch of flowers, right? And they're trying to measure the impact of those flowers along the edge of the field and the benefit across the field of yield increase. And that was spoke about just earlier here, and it works. I mean, well, does it work? It's hard to measure these small little benefits within the countryside, but when I walked through there as a beekeeper, I could see a dramatic increase of every type of pollinating insect flying. This is a picture in August when the crop's done and everything else is out of bloom, except for this little strip pollinator strip. I walked through, and my Carrie, she's the manager of the honey farm, and she knows her species of honeybees, and she counted 10 different species of honeybees within that pollinator strip. We had big honeybees and small honeybees, medium-sized honeybees. We had small little pollinators you could hardly see, and little bigger ones, and other ones is great big, almost like horns on them. And just that pollinator strip was moving with activity. It was absolutely fascinating, along with my honeybees within the area. Just providing a bit of food for a time when there's no food around. And I have actually employed this within the rest of my farm, where I find areas, Paul was talking about this too, where you have areas in the farm where it's not as productive and you're putting the inputs in, and you know, at some time you just start thinking to yourself, that's just a sink, a money sink, right? So when my brother can't farm those corners, I'll go in with this little planter and I'll plant exactly this, sunflowers and phacelia and other type of flowering plants. It drives them nuts, absolutely nuts, because this perfect little field all of a sudden has a bunch of weeds inside of it. But all these little pockets around the farm like that, what it's doing is providing the natural pollen to my hives to be able to use, and then I can use to be able to mix off the supplements to be able to grow my colonies. It works. It works. And this is what we're doing. Just showing some buckwheat in one of the pollinator strips there. You can't see the bees in there through, but I wish this was a video, because that picture would be moving with activity of pollinators. The other thing we're doing is we introduce more diversity within our rotations, and this is more reflective to economics and just finding more sources of revenue. So we've introduced sunflowers into our crop rotation, and that's been a huge benefit to my honeybees. By the time the canola is done blooming, I have another 10 days of sunflower bloom, and my colonies switch off the canola onto the sunflowers, and just provides them more extension of food further into fall. And as a beekeeper, we have to help ourselves too sometimes. So when we run out of flow, it always helps to then move those colonies to where there are flowers. I'm beekeeping in 3 municipalities. My municipality, the main one, is in Thompson. They're more reflective to, or how should I put this politely? They don't spray as much, so it leaves more wild growth in the ditches, more diversity, right? The other 2 municipalities around, they must spray twice throughout the summer, and there's nothing but grass growing in those ditches. As a beekeeper in the fall, I find it beneficial for me to move my colonies from those outside municipalities back home, because there's nothing for those colonies to feed on, and they actually almost die because there's nothing there. So I move them back into our municipality, and they continue their growth, right? You can almost see it when you drive between the lines. It's looking through as a beekeeper, you're seeing like this desert, this living desert. And you drive back into some place where the ditches are, more flowers, and then all of a sudden it seems more lush. There's more activity, there's more growth. Things are living. Diversity of things are living. I pay attention to that kind of stuff because it means to my bottom line. And as beekeepers, we can feed bees. We just need a little bit of access to that pollen, as I've been arguing. And with that pollen, then we can supplement the rest in a lot of ways. Just those little bits of flowers around the edges, scattered throughout the countryside, along the roadways, ditches, field edges, tree lines, sloughs. And as beekeepers, this is in the fall especially, this is when we're preparing our colonies for winter. We use all those fall pollen plants to build our colonies into winter nests. Without the pollen or proper nutrition, bees can't fatten up properly for winter. Just like any other animal, they prepare for winter, they fatten themselves up. And this is a good example of that. You have one bee on the one side is a forager bee, summer bee, not packing on the fat stores. The other side is a prepared winter bee. That's the fats and protein stores within their bodies to get them through winter. And this is why we need the pollen to be able to develop these bees, fatten them up, and allow them to get through winter. And I use all those pockets of flowers across the countryside to help, of our farm, to help our hives fatten up real nice. One of my ditches. It's a beautiful site, full of alfalfa, providing nutrition. Further down the way, there's clover. You know, there might be some type of a sunflower and goldenrod down there too. Just the diversity of pollen in the fall just helps my bees prepare themselves for winter. And as they bring in that pollen, even though it's not a lot sometimes, but it's some, there's in the center of that colony there, that's a protein patty. I'm trying to help build those bees by providing them more nutrition, the bulk of the nutrition they can use as they mix it off of the pollen. And if I did my job properly, in the fall when I'm going through and tipping these colonies back, some boxes of bees going into winter, nice and healthy, ready for winter to endure the hardness of the winter ahead. And this is where the rubber meets the road, is right here. So you've done your job properly, and the bees have had everything they needed to be able to maintain themselves throughout the season. As they go back into winter, you're looking at healthy nests. And that's what we're trying to do as we strive as beekeepers. So as a farmer and a beekeeper looking at our changing environment, all I ask is everyone is to simply try to appreciate and maintain those little pockets of the natural world we live in. Sustainability takes effort. And if we just put a little bit of effort into promoting all types of natural resources, we will effectively maintain our ecological balance. So with that, I appreciate your attention. I'm still seeing smiles in the crowd, so that is really good. I have time maybe for a question or two if you have any. Thank you.
Hi there. So I have a quick question. Well, no, it's not quick. I hate dandelions. I'm just going to say that right now. It reduces yields, as I'm sure you know, and also interferes with forage stands. I also hate social media because you get this one person that puts up a meme about save the dandelions, save the dandelions. And I guess I'm wondering why beekeepers don't speak out more about that, especially since dandelions are essentially junk food, if I'm like following you correctly. Like, why aren't we not encouraging, especially in urban areas, right? Like, why aren't we telling them to plant better sources of pollen? Like you said, the Saskatoon apple, chokecherry, maple, like all of those wonderful trees that also sequester carbon at the same time, help keep the world cooler. Like, trees are way better than dandelions. Like, so can we just stop? I'm sorry, that's like just it's just my personal opinion, but like, can we get away from the dandelions a little bit? And like you said, we want to work together, right? Like they're an invasive weed. So why not focus more on the trees?
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say is, as farmers, we need to be able to farm our land. Because it costs us money, right? I think the conversation gets lost as beekeepers try to communicate to the landowners, us telling them to change their management practice. There's a disconnect there, and it doesn't make any sense because we need to do our jobs. We manage our weeds within our farms also. I'm not leaving a dandelion stand within our crop. That's ridiculous. And there is a narrative there to, don't mow your lawns and stuff like that. And I think, you can understand what they're trying to achieve, is trying to promote more diversity in the landscape and such, but I think that needs to be channeled a little bit more effectively. And how can we manage this problem in a more proactive way that, doesn't negatively affect other people? Like if you have your lawn, you don't like dandelions, we shouldn't be telling those people how to manage their lawns. That's just ridiculous. But we can maybe promote the idea of encouraging more diversity, either in your garden, or a tree row hedge on the side, or just a pollinator strip like I was showing you there. Just a little effort like that. Ditches. But we have to be very careful as we work through those challenges, because, like I was saying before, there's trade-offs, right? So once we do switch our management practice, bring more beneficials flowering within their ditches, then we have to start focusing more attention to the noxious weeds and the bulrushes, and then you start running into problems with snow load in the ditches and water not clearing properly. So we have to switch our mindset in a way to be able to achieve what we want, but we have to accept the fact that it's going to cost us more time and money and effort to be able to achieve what we want. So that's where the conversation has to go, I believe. And I appreciate that comment. One more question.
Thank you. It was a very intelligent and easy to understand presentation. I remember my brother saying 20 years ago that he could start seeding wheat when the maple stopped, the maple sap stopped running. I'm wondering if the trees are blooming earlier, will you have to move your bees to, say, the path to be able to you can produce honey and collect pollen from the trees?
So the question comment was geared around the changes we're seeing within the seasons as things evolve. There's cycles. I believe in cycles. There's cycles where we have early springs and we have cycles where we have late springs. And the last 2 or 3 years, we've been in that late cycle spring. Kind of almost like fall and spring is reversed. We're having nice falls, nice extended falls. We're just having these terrible cold springs. That's terrible for honeybees, especially for a beekeeper trying to manage the bees like that. So in a way, we have to, just like the farmers, we have to deal with the problem at hand. So we come out of spring, and if it is a late spring, we just have to be aware to manage it that way. So the trees come in a little bit later, we have to focus a little bit more on feeding the bees, something like that. In the fall, they're rooting up later into the season, so our treatments for our parasites have to be reflective to the change in the conditions as it goes later in fall. So we can't get away just treating in spring. We might have to start pushing that further down the line into October to control our pest problems properly. So everything's very dynamic. And it's very important that we, just like the honeybee, like they're reflective to the environment around them. As a beekeeper, we have to see what's going on around them and manage according to that. We're very connected to the natural world. I appreciate the comment.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Ian. Just before you get too far, I've got nice, just a small token of our appreciation here. Sorry, and yeah, but really appreciate that you come and give us an education on how the world of bees works. So thank you, and there you go. We'll grab a quick picture here, I think. There we go. Yeah, get it up on the same level. Awesome. One more. Thanks. Awesome. Yeah, so I think we're running a little bit behind, but we'll just swing right into our panel here. So if I can get the panelists to come up, and we'll get started right away. Yeah, just one more time, make sure everybody checks out the trade show on our breaks there. We got lots of good booths, lots of things to learn, and might have something to make your life easier on the farm. So make sure to check that out on our breaks. Once we're finished here, we're going to run into lunch, and then if we could try and be back by about 1:30, we'll get rolling again after the lunch break. So yeah. Okay, so I think we have some videos to do some introductions here, but from the far side to closest to me, we've got Yvonne Lawley, Trent Alexander, and Troy Stozek. So I think we'll get rolling here with some videos.
Hi, I'm Troy Stozek from Fresh Roots Farm. We're located near Cartwright, Manitoba, and I'm excited to be at the conference this year to chat with you a little bit about what we're up to. We have a kind of a cattle operation where we market grass-fed beef, and we also have a honeybee business that we've integrated into our lifestyle and business model that I'm excited to share with you some of the trials and tribulations thereof. And yeah, I look forward to a good conversation. I will see you there.
Hello, I'm Yvonne Lawley, a professor in the Department of Plant Science at the University of Manitoba. My research is in the area of agronomy and cropping systems. I've worked on many different crops in Western Canada and many different soil management practices, from cover crops to reducing tillage and intercropping. Like these mounts from Pavlichenko in the early 30s, my roots run deep in interest in regenerative practices. I'm happy to be with you today at the conference to participate in this panel on pollinator habitat. I'm happy to share some of the results from the experiments we've been doing on farms across Manitoba in establishing and quantifying the benefits of pollinator habitat.
Hi, my name is Trent Alexander. I operate a small mixed farm with my partner, my 2 boys, and my parents, just west of Lenore, Manitoba. We're right along the Assiniboine Valley, northeast of Burton. We've run around 125 cows in our cow calf operation and 900 acres of grain land that we see there annually. Being this close to the valley, our land's usually pretty sandy and light. That's why it's important to me to incorporate regen practices such as ant grazing and cover cropping. I hope that today I can bring a bit of knowledge to the discussion on this panel, and I look forward to hearing from all the other speakers at the conference. Thanks for now.
Great, thanks you guys. That was a great introduction. Yeah, so I got some questions to get us started here, but by all means, find a mic if you guys got any burning questions, and I'll try and keep an eye on things and we can get your questions out there. So just to get us started, in your experience, how do farms and ranches stand to benefit from the presence of pollinators or pollinator habitat? Might we see some synergies between beef and bees and that kind of thing? Don't all jump at once.
I guess I'll take a crack at that. I mean, we've heard a lot about that already today with a lot of the presentations that we've heard. Thanks again to Paul and Ian for shedding a whole bunch of light on the importance of diversity and diverse landscapes in our agricultural zones. And like, I think a lot of us in this room are already going to great lengths, whether they have honeybees or not, to promote pollinator-friendly habitats. I don't want to underemphasize that. I feel like honeybees take up a lot of stage space in the media and stuff like that. Everybody's concerned about bee health, and they hear about bees dying and all the struggles that they're having. But I think the conversation really should be shifted in a lot of senses towards native pollinators, like Paul was talking in great length about. Some of the synergies we see on our place with bees and cows intermixing are just the obvious ones. I mean, they both need shelter, trees and shrubs, things that we've been fortunate enough to inherit on our acres through the shelter belt programs from the years previous. Unfortunately, which have taxed in a lot of ways, and trees have become very, very expensive. Another story, but bees stand to benefit, as Ian was suggesting and describing, around the shoulder seasons, as far as the early pollen sources from maple trees and paraganas, willows, all those species that we're very fortunate to have in abundance on our landscape, and we're trying to enhance with greater tree planting efforts and so on. Also, our cattle stand to benefit similarly from those on the landscape as well, for the obvious benefits around shade and shelter and in the winter and summer months alike. So yeah, that's one thing that comes to mind. Anybody else?
I haven't got a lot to add to that, I guess, but where I am, there's we have lots of native pasture and lots of sloughs and such that you wouldn't be able to work up if you wanted to use for cropping. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me to be able to incorporate that with cattle and to leave it as it is to promote diversity in the landscape and that sort of stuff, I guess.
So I don't have any cows.
But through the on-farm University of Manitoba pollinator strip project that Ian talked about, and I know that there are many other producers in this room that helped us immensely by stepping up when we asked for those to participate in this project. So thank you to Ian and all of you in this room who joined us in this project. And so I think that, we talked about, we heard Paul today talk about those messy places that exist. And my interest is either where those messy spaces don't exist and we need to augment that habitat, how can we bring it? And I am not that, bee and insect person on the team. I am very much the plant person. Like, how do we get this in the ground and get it up and make it look respectable? And land stewardship look like? And I hope that in the next 10 years, the way we think about these areas and how they fit into, all kinds of operations changes. And I hope that as an educator, I can partner with influential farmers to help make that shift happen.
Great. Yeah, no, I feel like we've got a pretty diverse set of backgrounds here. As you said, no cows, but I think you just really bring something to the table there through your research and, variability between the two farms. So that's kind of neat. I think we've got a question out there. Yeah.
Hi. This question's probably more for Yvonne, Lawley, but everyone feel free to answer. With the pollinator strip program, are you focusing on just getting wildflowers out there, or are you focusing on native species? Because lots of our native species flower earlier in the season. They're going to benefit, I think, a broader range of insects compared to the invasive species. So I was just curious what that project looks like.
Great question. So very naively, we started the project, and the idea that we had at the time was we were going to seed once and have this perfect blend of things that were going to flower, like annuals that were going to flower in the first year, and then some domesticated perennials that were going to take over maybe in years 2 and 3, and then we had some native species in the mix that were then going to come into their fullness in years 3, 4, 5. So that was our utopian dream. We started the project in a drought year, followed by 2 or 3 more drought years. And so what we found in the project, seeding, reseeding again, until we ran out of seed budget, was that, annuals are super reliable. You put them in the ground, we've bred them, we've selected for them to, come and bloom more reliably than even the perennial species that, hey, you've got a lot of people in the room here that probably are pretty well versed at getting perennials established. We know that it varies from year to year, but you just keep on trying, right? And the natives, that I think is the dream and the thing that we need to figure out. We need a good seed source, and so there's sort of this supply-demand issue of having access to native seed, and then also having strategies to establish that farmers can tolerate I love Paul's term messy spaces, right? We just don't have a mental model where messy spaces in agricultural landscapes are tolerated and seen as beneficial. So how can we come up with a strategy to establish these natives because of all the values that they provide? And whether you want, for us in our project, we ran out of seed budget because we had to seed year after year. So I think it's important to have multiple strategies that are going to work and help people enter this space wherever they're at. So whether they're someone who wants to seed an annual once and try it and see if maybe it does something, versus those who know that if they put the investment, put the time into creating space and being patient for natives to show up, that that they will, and hopefully reap those benefits.
Yeah,
So-
I'm a fan of the shotgun approach, so I can definitely relate to you there. But yeah, yeah, I think we've got some more questions out here. We'll see what we can do.
Hi guys. I used to have a really strong relationship with my municipality, and then about 5 years ago I heard Ian speak, and he opened up my eyes that we have all this wasted land on this perfect grid, that we can actually establish flowering species and native species. We can solve a lot of problems. I say I used to have a good relationship with my municipality because I went to them and presented what I thought were excellent ideas as far as how we can establish these areas and what a positive impact that it would have, not just on our municipality, which I thought how amazing it would be if Louise municipality, which is what I call home, had beautiful flowering ditches where nobody else did. I went in with a peace agreement and I came out with a declaration of war. It did not go well. So I guess I'm curious, Yvonne, maybe from a greater policy standpoint, is there an appetite for something like this, whether it's a policy or I guess interest from higher ups, whether that's universities or industry, promoting that idea? And I guess for you two other guys on a more local standpoint, I guess what is the appetite, or have you spoken to municipalities as far as implementing some of these ideas and maybe some strategies for the greater room, because we can all go home and start pestering our municipalities to start implementing this? Thank you.
Anybody got some thoughts?
Just very quickly, I think that resonates with me very well. We've been working at this in our municipality, at least beginning stages, and it's maybe not as intense as a declaration of war, but I think there is some people that are receptive to it, and I think the watershed districts, are working at this and willing to explore this. And I think, as you say, it's an incredibly huge resource. I mean, the potential is vast, and for now, we're working. We got the no spray zone on all of our acres, and I think everybody can do that as landholders. Just get on that kind of the buffer that you can opt out of having the RM spray your ditches. And that also can create some more declarations of war with your neighbors if they're not on board with that sort of thing. But yeah, just starting the conversation is a good place to go.
I guess I haven't really done anything with my municipality about that. I'm just happy to have the roads graded for the most part.
You know, I'm just a researcher, and I think it's my role to provide data to measure, and I'm not doing this alone, I'm wearing that hat, so I'm representing, you know, like a team of people, Alejandro Castamanga, Jason Gibbs, Kyle Bobby Wash, even on the weed side, Rob Goulden from Plant Science was also involved in this team on this project, and we very much had sort of this multifunctional assessment that we wanted to do in this project to be able to understand the trade-offs. And so I think, you know, just like Paul was saying this morning, like having data is huge. So you can begin these conversations based on data, based on your experience. And I think Ian did such a great job of showing the complexity of what it's going to take, how much conversation and planning it's going to take Joe's perfectly reasonable and logical proposal and actually, you know, have conversations. We need to find those entry points for those conversations, and maybe it's not going to be on every square mile in every municipality, but I think we can snowball, right? So I think we can decide where we're going to trial these practices and then how we're going to collect data to build and have these conversations. But there needs to be advocates on both sides, and I think a lot of those people are in this room.
Yeah, I think finding some common ground maybe to start with, and going from there. I agree with you completely. Microphone number 1 there, please.
Thank you. I'd like to direct a question to Yvonne. To the government people, the support staff, on lands. I think what Ian was saying and the rest of us is, you know, it's so important to take care of the ditches. One of the problems that I see in Interlake is they see pond species in the ditches, ditches drowned out, and then comes Phragmites, typhus, and all the other ones impeding drainage. And then we're getting multi-million-dollar crop insurance claims. If we were to properly landscape and LiDAR and everything else, these drainage pathways, far less damage to crops, cleaner water, etc. So I think that's a message that we have to take forward to the program. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sean, I think we'll get you to wrap it up here for us.
Okay, just a question more geared toward Troy. When you added bees, did it change any of your management of your cattle herd to try to, make more habitat for your bees, change grazing or anything like that? And if you did make changes, did you see any adverse effects to your cattle herd when you made those changes?
The only adverse effects I could think of is just me being stretched way thinner with my labor. Bees definitely add a huge labor requirement. I'm a little bit jealous of Ian's situation where he could have a division of labor amongst brothers in that way. I'm trying to do a lot of it myself. We've hired people too during the season. But yeah, there are probably more synergies, I think, than adversities on competing ends. Some of the really cool things I've seen, we've fortunately been attending these events for a long time and gleaning information from the Regenerative Ag Circle for a long time and holistic management. And so we've adopted kind of mob grazing approaches, and we've done some total grazing and stuff like that on our acres. Seen some really good results. And so also have pretty sandy land, and our land benefits a lot from long recoveries, pretty intensive grazes and long recoveries. And so the great pollinating effect that bees have on our acres is really highlighted in that sense. We've seen a lot of new species showing up. The flowering species are thriving. Loads and loads of pollen sources. It kind of has been reinforcing itself over time, especially we're just seeing lots and lots of additional floral sources, and we're starting to see some native plants moving in too, as those kind of long recoveries kind of start showing their benefit, which is really exciting. But yeah, honestly, it was kind of a joke, like that first comment, but like the balance between like finding a way to because all that intensive management is costly too, right? Setting up fences, moving cattle, sometimes a few times a day. So if we don't have the right labor to do that, I can't do it all. And finding labor was hard this year, for example. I don't want to say thankfully it was a dry year. We didn't have to. We decided to ease back on some of the more intensive grazing because there was literally no regrowth to worry about overgrazing with. Yeah, it's a lot to try to do both of those worlds because honeybees, as Ian was depicting, is a lot of work. So we're trying to constantly find a balance between what scale is appropriate for each of our enterprises. We're direct marketing all of our beef as well, so that's another kind of layer of effort on our farm. So yeah, it's a constant renegotiation and negotiation at our place to try to figure out what that balance is. No direct risks, I don't think, with honeybees interacting with cattle. I'm sure the odd one takes a sting on the bud or something that we don't know about. We see the odd one taking a quick rip or a jump. I'm sure it does happen, but honestly, yeah, nothing but overall benefits. And it also has encouraged us to really hone in on making sure we got lots and lots of legumes in our environment. A lot of our honey that we're marketing is legume based, and it's really, really great textured honey that is very suitable to put into jars and sell to customers. It's got really good flavor. So it's kind of a mutually reinforcing process to try to get lots of legumes and diversity of floral sources on the landscape that feeds our bees and keeps the diversity of which I think keeps our bees healthier than if they were in a monoculture environment. And it also just, yeah, obviously the diversity is a good thing for beef operation as well. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Troy. Yeah, it seems like we're hearing that word balance quite a bit with this panel, and certainly with Ian as well, whether we're balancing our labor, we're balancing our ag endeavors and our kind of more conservation-minded activities. So I think that's kind of interesting and something to pay attention to. But again, thank you very much, you guys. I apologize, it seems like we're kind of rushing you through, but we don't want to stand between all these people and their lunch either, I guess. So thank you very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Can you get a round of applause for them, please? And just a reminder, we're going to try and be back here for 1:30 to get things rolling again, I think. So, thank you. Thank you, guys.